Betrayal doesn't always come with raised voices or broken vows. Sometimes it arrives quietly, disguised as love and care, a glass of water, a vitamin handed at bedtime, a calm voice saying, "Everything will be fine." For Hannah, that betrayal came from the one person she trusted most, her husband. As Hannah weakened day by day, Brian was more than her caretaker. He was the source of her suffering. Behind his polished image as a chiropractor and devoted father, he had set up a financial plan not for their future, but for the time after her death. He'd taken out multiple life insurance policies totaling over $1 million, all listing him as the sole beneficiary. What looked like devotion was, in truth, calculation. What seemed like protection was exploitation. And in the end, the man who vowed to cherish his wife in sickness and in health used her sickness as the path to his own fortune. This is the story of a marriage that became a contract of death, where love was poisoned for profit. Hannah lived in Decatur, Alabama, in a home organized entirely around her children's routines. Her days revolved around early wake-ups, daycare drop-offs, meals, naps, and evening activities. She manages the household and works part-time as a skincare specialist, sometimes seeing clients at home, sometimes at a guest house. She did not pursue a steady full-time career. Her husband, Brian Mann, was the family's financial breadwinner, allowing her to focus on housework and raising the children. They married in 2018. By the time of these events, Hannah was in her early 20s. Brian, her husband, was a local chiropractor who ran his own practice. Brian's clinic had a reputation for order and professionalism, friendly receptionists, spotless rooms, and strict scheduling. Patients praised his attentive consultations, personalized treatment plans, and reliable follow-up for chronic conditions. His strong reputation brought steady referrals, and the community trusted him. Brian's family lived simply but comfortably. Supported by the clinic's income, big expenses were planned in advance. But when it came to the children, they didn't hesitate to spend. Neighbors saw a neat house, a well-kept yard, weekend outings, all painted a picture of a perfect life. Successful husband, good wife, 2 young children, a peaceful lifestyle, but inside, things were more rigid than they seemed. Brian controlled many domestic decisions and gradually isolated Hannah from others. After the wedding, her meetups with friends dwindled. Appointments were often postponed or cancelled because of inconvenience, bad timing, or no one to look after the kids. She left social media and was eventually locked out of her accounts. Brian said it was for privacy and safety. He kept access to their shared email and passwords. He handled nearly all household administration, subscriptions, bills, appointments. While Hannah's days were consumed by home tasks, mornings were for getting everyone else ready. Afternoons went to errands, cooking, and laundry. Evenings followed the children's schedules. She rarely visited the clinic, and only when necessary. Brian told others, and likely himself, that everything was under control. He cited his medical background at home too. Advice on sleep, vitamins, and nutrition. Appearing deeply involved in family life, that's how it looked. A well-ordered life, growing control within the household, and the slow erasure of Hannah's personal space. In mid-2021, a change came that seemed harmless at first. Leveraging his role as a health professional, Brian suggested Hannah start a daily vitamin regimen tailored to support her as a busy mother with little time to rest. He said the supplements came from his clinic, ensuring quality and safety. They were chewable gummies and powdered drinks. Trusting his advice, Hannah accepted it as a routine wellness step. Soon it was habit. Each evening, Brian brought the supplements to the bedroom with a glass of water. If she forgot, he gently reminded her, stressing consistency and promising benefits with regular use. His persistence looked like care. A few weeks later, Hannah began to notice slight changes in her body. Fatigue, dizziness. She attributed it to the workload of housework and childcare. Gradually, the symptoms became more severe. Back pain, frequent stomach pain. Her diet hadn't changed, yet she was losing weight. By the end of summer, her clothes hung loosely. Even though she hadn't tried to slim down, Brian stayed calm. As Hannah's symptoms emerged, he told her that her body was adjusting to improved nutrition, that any side effects were temporary, and that she would feel stronger within a few months. He spoke with absolute confidence, drawing on his medical background. Hannah wasn't alarmed. Her symptoms developed slowly, without any sudden crisis. Occasional good days made her think she might be recovering. Even as her energy declined and her weight continued to drop, it was this period that laid the foundation for a health condition that quickly became serious and dangerous. By late summer 2021, Hannah's condition had worsened significantly. Nausea set in, making it difficult to eat regularly. From September 2021 to January 2022, she lost nearly 40 pounds, dropping to about 84 pounds. Even doing daily housework left her breathless and exhausted. Standing in the kitchen for long was hard. She felt dizzy and had lower back pain. Stairs exhausted her. Eventually, she struggled to stay balanced and began using a rolling office chair to move around the house to reduce strain and avoid falls. Nighttime muscle cramps increased, and her sleep became shallow and restless. Despite Hannah's obvious decline in health, Brian discouraged her from seeking medical attention. He insisted he could manage her routine himself and framed her symptoms as the stress of parenting, seasonal fatigue, and lack of sleep, saying they didn't require professional attention. At the same time, Brian tightened control over the household. He decided when Hannah should rest, reminded her to take the supplements he provided, and personally brought her water to keep her on his schedule. He recommended at-home remedies, more rest, hydration, and light stretches, demonstrating them as safe and effective. He stayed soft-spoken and attentive, projecting care. By late fall, fatigue overshadowed everything else. Lifting her son and daughter became difficult. Hannah often asked them to wait while she sat to catch her breath. She had to spread out chores. Simple tasks took hours. By December, the contrast between how she looked and how she felt was clear. Her clothes hung loose and her face looked sunken. Yet her temperature was normal. Adding to the confusion, she knew she was getting worse but couldn't understand why. Her diet and workload hadn't changed. By early January 2022, Hannah was in crisis. Standing caused sudden weakness and brief vision blurring. Eating was a struggle. Food sometimes repulsed her, and a few bites could trigger nausea. Moving around without support became dangerous. She relied on the rolling chair to get from room to room. Still, Brian remained steadfast. He kept saying, "The worst is over," insisting she just needed more time to recover. He stayed calm, managed details, issued reminders, and spoke with unwavering confidence. When Hannah's condition became life-threatening, she did not seek help on her own. Her mother, visiting occasionally, recognized the danger and decided to act without telling Brian. Hannah could barely walk, so her mother helped her dress and guided her to the car. On the way to the hospital, Hannah said little, mostly describing abdominal pain and extreme weakness. At the University of Alabama Hospital emergency room, her mother immediately told staff that her condition had been deteriorating for months without medical care. Doctors began by checking the basics: weight, blood pressure, temperature, and heart rate. The results were alarming. Hannah's weight was dangerously low. Her pulse was weak, and her blood pressure was unstable. Physicians initially considered a broad range of causes, from chronic conditions to serious systemic illnesses, and ordered extensive lab tests and diagnostic procedures. Blood work revealed a critical finding. Hannah's blood lead level was about 80 micrograms per deciliter. For comparison, anything above 10 is medically concerning. Her level posed an immediate, life-threatening risk. Additional tests showed signs of internal organ distress, and she soon developed acute respiratory failure. Doctors placed her on a ventilator to support her breathing. Imaging scans revealed fine, metallic-like particles throughout her tissues. Lead deposits accumulated over time from ongoing exposure rather than a single event. This chronic exposure explained her gradual symptoms and the sudden crisis. Once her condition became critical, her health declined so quickly that doctors induced a medical coma to reduce physiological stress and prevent permanent damage. Treatment began immediately with chelation therapy to bind and remove the lead. Progress was slow and required continuous monitoring. Hannah remained hospitalized for nearly 2 months. During that time, the team stabilized her breathing, improved her vital signs, and lowered her blood lead levels. Still, the damage from prolonged exposure was evident, and full recovery was unlikely. Doctors emphasized that even a 1-day delay might have been fatal. Hannah's survival ultimately hinged on her mother's decision to act, breaking from the family's usual pattern and enabling a timely diagnosis and urgent treatment. Once the diagnosis was confirmed, the hospital notified the Morgan County Department of Human Resources, which then alerted state investigators in Alabama. Specialists in toxic metal exposure took the case. Their first step was to test Hannah's family home for environmental sources of lead. They began in the kitchen and bathrooms, collecting water samples from every faucet and removing filters for analysis. They documented the condition of the plumbing and dishware used for food and drinks. Investigators also collected paint chips from older surfaces, dust samples, and soil from outside. They reviewed pantry items, including foods and nutritional products given to the children. Brian cooperated, pointing out the vitamin supplements Hannah had been taking from his clinic. He also suggested fast food as a possible source of exposure. Investigators documented his comments, but quickly ruled out that theory. With a blood lead level near 80 micrograms per deciliter, other cases would likely have appeared, yet no similar local incidents were reported. Furthermore, Brian and their other children showed no signs of lead exposure, undermining the idea of common environmental source. Initial lab tests of the home's water, paint, dust, pantry items, and nutritional products showed no hazardous lead levels or notable abnormalities. At this point, investigators had found no typical household source of contamination. They recommended testing for all household members. Brian reported that his son and daughter's results were normal and said he would complete his own testing later at a separate facility. His delay raised concerns, especially since some tests could have been done immediately on site. This was flagged for follow-up. A second home inspection occurred a few days later, with experts from the Alabama Department of Public Health expanding the scope of testing. They collected water from initial flow and post-flush samples, gathered dust from multiple surfaces, inspected filters, and took swabs from the kitchen's sink, kettle, and blender to check for metal leaching. Investigators also requested packaging from the vitamins and powder mixes to identify the manufacturer and batch numbers. The second round of results reinforced the initial findings. There was no source of lead in the home environment. However, the source and composition of Hannah's supplements remained unclear because the investigators did not have access to actual samples. They began to reconstruct Hannah's daily routine by talking to her family and close contacts. They focused on who prepared the meals, and especially the timing, location, frequency, and context in which Hannah took the supplements, the family reported that Brian regularly reminded Hannah to take them in the evening. At home, with a glass of water, he left by her bed. These details supported a working theory of intentional oral exposure. The initial stages of the investigation revealed three main findings. There was no evidence of lead contamination in the home environment. The hypothesis of exposure through eating at restaurants was not supported by any definitive data. Further consideration of factors related to dietary supplement use, particularly Brian's direct role, warranted further scrutiny. As a result, investigators shifted their attention to Brian, verifying his statements and checking whether he had access to lead outside the home. After Hannah was hospitalized, Brian arrived at the hospital, claiming he had performed a self-exam. He said he used X-ray equipment at his own clinic and believed he saw a foreign substance in his body that could be lead. This claim puzzled the medical team. Self-diagnosing with X-rays is highly unorthodox, and using clinic equipment for personal testing is not standard practice. Physicians insisted he undergo a full, independent evaluation. When Brian realized the hospital would conduct the tests, he became visibly anxious. Screening confirmed the presence of lead in his system, but only at a low level, consistent with very recent exposure, too low to cause symptoms and not indicative of long-term accumulation. This is in stark contrast to Hannah's results, which showed clear evidence of prolonged exposure at high levels over several months. Experts concluded that Brian had likely ingested lead shortly before coming to the hospital to present himself as a fellow victim. This may have been an attempt to appear proactive and concerned, but the exposure timeline did not match and undermined his story. Interviews with colleagues and acquaintances further showed that Brian exhibited no symptoms of chronic lead exposure throughout Hannah's illness. His behavior and physical condition remained normal. To investigators, this strongly suggested Hannah's poisoning was not accidental. The pattern pointed to deliberate poisoning with no apparent risk to other family members. Brian's attempt to cast himself as a victim only deepened suspicion. Authorities believed he was trying to divert attention from the central issue, how lead had been entering Hannah's body over an extended period. In summer 2022, a contractor who had worked for Brian the previous year contacted investigators. He reported that in 2021, he had installed an X-ray room at Brian's clinic, lining the walls with lead sheets. After completion, leftover lead sheets and scraps remained. According to the contractor, Brian asked that the unused pieces be left behind, saying he would handle them. At the time, this seemed routine. Brian owned the clinic and had paid for the materials, but after learning of Hannah's diagnosis, the contractor reconsidered. He gave an official statement to police. Investigators compared his account with Hannah's medical timeline and found a match. Her symptoms worsened markedly in August 2021. Shortly after the clinic renovation was completed, the dates aligned. Brian gained access to lead just before Hannah's prolonged illness began. This gave investigators a documented external source of the toxic metal separate from the family's home. The contractor on the clinic project provided a detailed timeline from start to final cleanup. He explained standard procedures. Leftover materials are either returned to the warehouse or disposed of safely. He did not see what Brian did with the remaining lead. He simply handed it to him at the clinic owner's request. Investigators obtained the service agreement, start and completion dates, and a full materials list, confirming both the timing and presence of lead-based shielding. Clinic staff reported that only Brian had keys to the X-ray room and that the post-installation cleanup occurred without the contractor. This timeline became central. In 2021, Brian had access to a real source of lead. While the contractor's statement did not explain how the lead was administered, it established where it came from and supported the theory of intentional exposure. As the investigation progressed, another key detail emerged. Hannah had multiple life insurance policies totaling about $3 million. All policies named Brian as policyholder and sole beneficiary. Because they were spread across several insurers, they were harder to detect and obscured the overall coverage. The first policy was taken out in 2020, and Hannah likely knew about it. In 2021, around the time her health declined, additional policies were added, attempts to increase coverage by another one. $5 million were denied when applications were rejected. The timing of these expansions, coinciding with Hannah's worsening condition, strengthened the case for intent. The health questionnaires required for approval were especially important. They demanded proof of good health, and significant weight loss could trigger denial. According to Hannah, Brian pressured her to wear weighted ankle bands during weigh-ins to conceal her weight loss and make her appear stable, benefiting the applications. During medical consultations, Brian seemed more focused on policy limits and conditions than on diagnosis or treatment. Staff noted he repeatedly raised insurance technicalities as a priority. Hannah's insurance forms carried electronic signatures, which later became disputed. The defense claimed Hannah was aware and involved. She denied this, saying Brian had access to some of her digital accounts. Investigators focused less on the specific content of the forms and more on the broader questions: who initiated the applications, who stood to benefit, and how medical documentation was tailored to fit policy requirements. A review of the family's coverage revealed a red flag. Brian, the primary earner, had a relatively modest policy, while Hannah, who contributed less financially, was insured for far larger amounts. Typically, higher earners carry higher coverage. This discrepancy suggested potential financial misconduct and pointed to a clear motive. Hannah's death would have yielded substantial payouts to Brian. By trial, both sides had firm positions. The prosecution argued that Brian deliberately poisoned Hannah with lead to collect insurance benefits, supported by medical data, a detailed timeline, and extensive financial records. The defense tried to undermine the evidence, citing procedural issues. They emphasized that there was no direct proof of how the lead entered Hannah's system and urged the court to reject circumstantial evidence without definitive proof of the method of poisoning. Court proceedings began in June 2025 on an expedited schedule. The defense concentrated on the collection and storage of biological samples, noting that urine was sometimes collected in non-standard containers and handled outside proper laboratory conditions. They also emphasized two gaps: the incomplete chemical comparison between the lead found in Brian's clinic and the lead detected in Hannah's body, and the absence of the original supplement containers. The defense proposed alternative explanations, including accidental exposure. After hearing both sides, the court ruled the medical and procedural evidence admissible. It acknowledged procedural flaws that could affect how jurors weighed the evidence, but found they did not make it invalid. When witness testimony ended, the defense called no witnesses, arguing the prosecution bore the burden of proof. In closing, the prosecution presented a timeline. Brian obtained access to lead in 2021. Hannah's health declined soon after. No lead sources were found in the home. The theory of shared environmental exposure was weakened because no other household members showed contamination. The prosecution cited financial motive, insurance policies, and attempts to increase coverage, and medical analysis that refuted Brian's claim that he himself had been poisoned. The defense maintained that the evidence was circumstantial and lacked direct proof of how lead entered Hannah's system. After several hours of deliberation, the jury found Brian Mann guilty of attempted murder. The court ordered Brian held without bail, pending sentencing, and scheduled a trial for early August 2025. The judge outlined potential penalties, including life in prison. Depending on the extent of harm to Hannah, and the level of planning. At the August hearing, with Brian Mann already convicted of attempted murder using toxic substances, the prosecution sought the maximum sentence. They argued his actions were not a brief lapse, but a calculated, multi-stage effort over several months. During this period, he hid Hannah's worsening condition from medical providers, delayed her diagnosis, and promoted a false narrative of a shared household source. The defense asked the court to avoid a life sentence, citing Brian's clean record, community standing, medical career, prior support for his family, Hannah's survival and ongoing treatment, and lingering uncertainty about his intent. In explaining its decision, the court found that the full body of evidence, medical records, financial documents, witness testimony, and investigative findings showed a deliberate conduct. The judge described the crimes as prolonged, causing irreparable harm, with lifelong consequences for Hannah. Brian Mann was sentenced to 25 years in state prison, with no parole eligibility for the first 20 years. The court also ordered restitution for Hannah's medical costs and emotional damages, with the amount to be set in a separate civil proceeding. The sentence did not restore Hannah's former life. Although her condition stabilized, the effects of severe lead poisoning were irreversible. Doctors reported lasting neurological impairments, chronic pain, persistent fatigue, and a need for lifelong blood monitoring. Some motor function returned, but she still required a wheelchair for long distances. Hannah's son and daughter were placed in the care of her relatives. The case drew a strong public response. Former patients of Brian's clinic were shocked and confused by the verdict. Shortly after his arrest, the clinic was closed. Authorities seized all medical equipment, including the X-ray machine, for forensic analysis. Brian's medical license was revoked, and the building was later put up for sale. Insurance companies tied to the case launched internal audits of policies associated with Brian. They introduced new risk assessment measures, such as stricter verification of medical information for high-value policies. For law enforcement, the case set a precedent. Toxicological evidence can establish intent even without recovering the substance's delivery method. Investigators emphasized that indirect evidence, backed by expert analysis and consistent witness testimony, was pivotal in securing the conviction. Hannah publicly thanked the medical team, investigators, and witnesses, saying their efforts likely saved her life. She did not discuss future plans, focusing instead on healing and caring for her son and daughter. Lori and Charles Vallow initially crossed paths in the early 2000s, but they didn't become romantically involved until later. Marriage records indicate that Lori married her fourth husband, Charles Vallow, in 2006. This marriage was a new beginning for Lori, as Charles appeared to share her strong religious beliefs and need for stability. Charles, a successful businessman, provided financial security and genuine affection. Their relationship seemed to be founded on mutual respect and shared values, especially their dedication to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Lori had 2 children before marrying Charles: Colby Ryan, her son, and Tylee Ryan, her daughter, from a previous marriage to Joseph Anthony Ryan Jr. Charles became a devoted stepfather to both children, treating them as if they were his own. He clearly loved Lori's family and wanted to create a happy and secure home for them. In 2014, Charles and Lori added a new member to their family by adopting Joshua Jackson J.J. Vallow. J.J. was the biological grandson of Charles. As a child, he was cared for by Kay Woodcock, Charles's sister, and Larry Woodcock for nearly a year before being adopted by Charles. J.J. had autism and required specialized care. April Raymond, a friend of Lori's, described Lori as patient and well-suited to be J.J.'s mother. People who knew Lori at the time remember her as a dedicated and loving mother who was perfectly equipped to care for JJ's unique needs. She seemed to have found purpose in nurturing JJ, a vulnerable child who needed her support. Charles and Lori seemed like a loving couple to everyone they knew. Their relationship seemed filled with joy and happiness, leading those around them to believe they had found their soulmates. Social media posts indicate that sometime in 2014, the Vallows moved to Kauai in Hawaii. They operated a small business on the island. Their life seemed ideal, running a business together while raising a new family in one of the most beautiful places on Earth. Charles was incredibly supportive of Lori's dreams and ambitions. He encouraged her entrepreneurial spirit and stood by her through various business ventures. Those who knew him described Charles as a devoted husband who would do anything for his family. He was particularly protective of the children and took his role as their father figure very seriously. Charles couldn't help but beam with pride when talking about JJ's progress or Tylee's accomplishments in school. The family moved back to the mainland sometime between 2016 and 2017. This move coincided with the start of subtle changes in their relationship. Unbeknownst to others, Lori had started exploring religious beliefs outside of traditional Mormonism. She began reading books by authors who claimed to have unique knowledge about the end of the world and prophecies of the apocalypse. In 2017, people who knew Lori noticed shifts in her actions and what she believed. Around the same time, her relatives observed that her relationship with her children was changing. Friends mentioned she was reading books by Tammy Daybell, a doomsday author. Lori, who had been a loving and caring mother, started to seem distant from her children. She used to be very patient with JJ's special needs, but now she appeared to be getting annoyed by them. Tammy Daybell, who wrote several fiction books about preparing for the end of the world, lived outside Rexburg, Idaho. Through his writings, Chad promoted beliefs about multiple lives, spiritual gifts, and the approaching apocalypse. Lori became captivated by his books, a fascination that concerned those who knew her best. She became increasingly absorbed in these teachings, often spending hours discussing them with anyone who would listen. The change in Lori was gradual but unmistakable. Friends noticed she began speaking differently about her children, viewing them through the lens of Chad's bizarre spiritual teachings. Tylee's normal teenage behavior was now interpreted as something darker and more sinister. JJ's autism, which she had once handled with such patience and love, now seemed to frustrate her in ways that worried those who knew her. During the same period, a tragedy occurred that would later take on sinister significance. Joseph Anthony Ryan Jr. died on the 3rd of April, 2018. According to the medical examiner's report, the cause of death was ruled a heart attack. At the time, no one suspected anything unusual about his death. It was only later, when a disturbing recording surfaced, that people began to question whether Joseph's death was as natural as it seemed. In October 2018, Lori and Chad met for the first time at a religious conference in St. George, Utah. Lori's friend, Melania Giep, was also present. She observed that Lori and Chad were very friendly and engaged in long conversations about their religious beliefs. Gibb noticed a strong attraction between them and believed this meeting would significantly change the lives of many. Lori had read Chad's books before the conference and was excited to finally meet him, suggesting a pre-existing interest. From the start, they seemed to have a strong connection. Chad was a self-published author who professed to have visions and special insights into the spiritual realm. He claimed that 2 near-death experiences in his late teens and early 20s had granted him a unique connection to the spirit world. What made this meeting particularly significant was the speed with which their friendship blossomed into a deeper relationship. Lori confided in Gibb about a conversation she had with Chad shortly after they met, in which Chad told her that they had been married in a previous life. Gibb stated during Thursday's trial that Lori already believed in the concept of multiple lives, as they called it. This concept of being eternal companions from past lives became central to their relationship. Chad convinced Lori that they were special beings chosen by God for a divine mission. He told her that they had been married in previous lives and were destined to be together again. This wasn't merely attraction. In their minds, it was a cosmic reunion that had been foretold. The intensity of their connection was immediate and all-consuming. Following her meeting with Chad, Lori's behavior became increasingly erratic. Raymond observed a significant change in Lori upon her return from Hawaii years later. He noted that Lori made comments suggesting Charles was already dead and that a demon inhabited his body. Charles also noticed increasingly disturbing changes in his wife's behavior. She began speaking about zombies and dark spirits, claiming that people could be possessed by evil entities. After discovering his wife's affair with Chad, Charles confronted her. The loving, devoted wife he had married was vanishing before his eyes, replaced by someone he no longer recognized. Months before his death, Charles told a Gilbert police officer that his wife had adopted increasingly bizarre religious beliefs and thought he had become inhabited by a dark spirit. Charles reported Lori as saying, "You're not Charles. I don't know who you are, what you did to Charles, but I can murder you with my powers." Charles feared for the safety of his children. Lori's transformation was complete. She remained steadfast in her belief that Chad was a prophet with special powers and that their relationship was divinely ordained. The woman who had once been a devoted mother and wife was now someone entirely different. It was evident to everyone that Lori's devotion to Chad had consumed her completely. Charles felt helpless as he watched his wife drift further away from reality. He tried desperately to reach the woman he had fallen in love with, but she seemed determined to follow Chad down a path that led away from everything they had built together. With a heavy heart, Charles made the difficult decision to move out of the family home, though he remained committed to protecting his children. On July 11, 2019, Charles went to Lori's home in Chandler, Arizona, early in the morning to pick up JJ. It was supposed to be a routine visit. According to their arrangement, Charles was going to take JJ to school, but when he arrived at the house, something felt different. The tension was palpable, and what should have been a simple exchange turned into something far more sinister. Alex Cox, Lori's brother, was present. An altercation occurred, and Cox shot and killed Charles. Tylee told police that she had grabbed a baseball bat after she heard from her room Charles, Lori, and Alex arguing that Charles had taken the bat away from her and that she had then run away from the house with JJ. Alex Cox claimed he shot Charles in self-defense, fearing for their lives. However, there were disturbing inconsistencies in their timeline. Alex told officers that he called 911 a couple of minutes after the shooting, but records show the call wasn't made until much later. The scene was chaotic, filled with shock and horror as the reality of what had happened began to sink in. Charles Vallow, a devoted husband and father whose only desire was to protect his family, was dead. For those who knew Charles, the loss was devastating. He had been a man who brought stability and love into Lori's life, and now he was gone under circumstances that seemed increasingly suspicious. Alex Cox had a long history of violence. In 2007, he had attacked Joseph Anthony Ryan Jr. with a stun gun, claiming he was protecting Lori from abuse. Now, 12 years later, another of Lori's husbands was dead at Alex's hands. The pattern was becoming clear to those who knew the family's history. Shortly after Charles's death, Lori made a significant decision that would prove crucial to the unfolding tragedy. By the end of August 2019, Lori, her children, and Lori's niece, Melanie Boudreau, moved to Rexburg, Idaho. Alex Cox also moved to the same apartment complex, his presence in Idaho far from coincidental. He would play a crucial role in the events that followed. having become Lori's willing accomplice, someone she could depend on to help her achieve her goals, no matter how dark they might be. Idaho marked a new chapter in Lori's relationship with Chad. They were now living in the same community, able to see each other regularly while maintaining the pretense of separate lives. For Lori, Idaho represented freedom from the complications of her past. She felt she was finally on the path to her destiny with Chad. However, for Chad and Lori, the children represented obstacles to their so-called divine mission. According to their twisted beliefs, JJ and Tylee had become zombies, their original spirits replaced by dark entities. They believed the only way to free these trapped souls was to destroy the bodies that contained them. On the 8th of September, 2019, what would become their final family outing took place. Tylee, JJ, Lori, and Alex visited Yellowstone National Park. Police say this is the last known photo of Tylee before she disappeared. The photo shows what appears to be a normal family enjoying a day together, but beneath the surface, sinister plans were already in motion. After this trip to Yellowstone, Tylee Ryan would never be seen alive again. The next day, the 9th of September, 2019, would mark the beginning of the end for the Ryan family. Investigators say that on the morning after Tylee Ryan disappeared, Alex Cox's cell phone Jeep placed him in Chad's backyard for about 2 hours. Approximately 14 minutes after Alex's Jeep showed him leaving the property, Chad texted his wife, Tammy Daybell. The text read, "I spotted a big raccoon along the fence. I hurried and got my gun, and he was still walking along. I got close enough that one shot did the trick. He is now in our pet cemetery." The text was suspicious because raccoons are normally nocturnal animals and are not typically out during the day. 2 weeks later, on September 22, 2019, JJ Vallow suffered the same tragic fate. Police say JJ Vallow was last seen on September 22, 2019. Melanie Gibbs says that she and her boyfriend, David Warwick, were staying with Lori in Rexburg that weekend. Warwick says that on the night of the 22nd of September, he saw Alex Cox carry JJ into Lori's apartment, which would be the last time anyone saw the 7-year-old alive. On the 24th of September, Lori withdrew JJ from Kennedy Elementary in Rexburg and told administrators she was going to homeschool her son. This lie was just one of many Lori told to conceal the horrific truth of what had happened to her children. Both children deserved protection and love, not the horrific fate that awaited them. After learning of Tylee and JJ's disappearance, Melanie Boudreau is convinced that Charles's death, the children's disappearance, and the attempted assassination of him are all connected to Lori's religious group. She suspects that the attempted murder against him was motivated by Charles's life insurance policy. There was still one more person in the way of Lori and Chad's future together. Chad had texted Lori at one point that his wife, Tammy Daybell, had become a demon named Viola. He wrote to Lori, "The short version is that she has been switched. Tammy is in limbo, and a level 3 demonic entity is in her body." He further wrote that he was not fully sure of the timing for removal, but he don't want to wait, hinting at a dark plan. On October 9, 2019, Tammy posted on Facebook about a terrifying incident at her home. She recounted being approached outside by a man wearing a ski mask and carrying what she believed was a paintball gun. He shot at her several times, although she don't think it was loaded. She wrote about the October 9, 2019 attack. This attempted attack was a warning of what was to come. Just 10 days later, Tammy was dead. Chad told Tammy's sister, Samantha Gilliam, that Tammy had been sick, experiencing a coughing fit before dying. He claimed he found her dead on the morning of October 19, 2019. Her death was quickly ruled natural causes, and she was buried without an autopsy, raising suspicions later on. Tammy's funeral was held in Utah 3 days after her death. With Tammy's death, the final obstacle to Lori and Chad's relationship had been removed. Less than 3 weeks later, on the 5th of November, 2019, Lori and Chad were married in a small ceremony in Hawaii. In less than a year, every obstacle in Lori and Chad's lives had been erased. Chad's hasty remarriage struck many in their community as both callous and suspicious. Tammy had been a beloved school librarian and devoted mother to their 5 children. By late November 2019, Kay and Larry Woodcock, JJ's biological grandparents, were growing increasingly concerned about him after months of being unable to reach him. So Kay called the police and asked them to do a welfare check on JJ in Rexburg. When officers arrived at Lori's door on November 26, 2019, she told them JJ was in Arizona, visiting her friend Melanie Gibb. But when police contacted Gibb, they discovered this was a lie. JJ was not with her, and Gibb revealed that Lori had asked her to lie about the boy's whereabouts. When officers returned to the home just days later, after discovering that the story was a lie, Lori was gone. She and Chad had fled to Hawaii, leaving behind a community in shock and confusion. On December 20, 2019, police announced that Tylee and JJ were missing and named Lori and Chad Daybell as persons of interest. Photos of JJ and Tylee flooded the news as law enforcement and volunteers desperately searched for any sign of them. The children's disappearance captured the nation's attention, and everyone wanted to know where JJ and Tylee were. Meanwhile, another significant death occurred on December 12, 2019. Alex Cox died in Arizona of natural causes. Alex's death meant that a key figure in the conspiracy would never face justice for his role in the murders. On January 25, 2020, police served Lori with a warrant demanding she produce Tylee and JJ within 5 days. She ignored the court order completely. On February 20, 2020, Lori was arrested in Hawaii on charges including desertion and non-support of dependent children, obstruction, and contempt of court. Chad Daybell showed his support in the courtroom as she was extradited to Rexburg, Idaho, when an investigative reporter confronted Lori at the airport, asking where her children were and why she wasn't telling anybody where her children were. She refused to answer, walking away in silence with Chad by her side. Unbeknownst to law enforcement, the answers to their questions were buried just 50 feet from Chad's house, in his backyard. On June 2020, investigators executed a search warrant at Chad's home. A children's remains were discovered buried in shallow graves on the property Chad called home. The discovery began in an area the Daybell family called the Pet Cemetery. As investigators dug, they found disturbing items. They found a melted bucket. Under the bucket was a partial human skull, which turned out to be the remains of Tylee Ryan. The scene was gruesome, with evidence of unspeakable cruelty due to the condition of Tylee's remains. Determining the exact circumstances of her death was difficult. However, investigators were certain that her body had been dismembered and burned. The thought of this beautiful 16-year-old ending up this way was almost too much for those who knew her to bear. A short distance away, investigators found JJ's burial site. They started by removing a top layer of earth on a 4 by 2 foot patch of grass that was shorter than the rest. Beneath the rocks, they found thin pieces of wood paneling, and below that, a layer of black plastic. One of the crime scene investigators cut a hole in the top of this plastic, and beneath the black plastic was some white plastic, like a plastic bag. They cut through that. What they observed was brown human hair, the same color hair as JJ Vallow's. It appeared to be a small body, tightly wrapped in black plastic, covered in duct tape. For even the most seasoned police officers, the sight was deeply disturbing. The evidence from the children's remains revealed the horrific suffering they endured before their deaths. Autopsies showed the full extent of this horror. 7-year-old JJ Vallow died from asphyxiation. A plastic bag covered his head. sealed with duct tape, and his wrists and ankles were bound. Scratches on his neck suggested he struggled to breathe. He was found in red pajamas, covered by a blue children's blanket. 16-year-old Tylee Ryan was murdered, but the exact cause of death couldn't be determined due to the severe damage to her remains. Her body had been dismembered and burned. Forensic analysis found evidence of sharp trauma on her bones, indicating a tool was used. The brutality of these crimes deeply disturbed investigators and the community. These children did not die quickly or painlessly. Their deaths were prolonged and torturous. On May 25, 2021, Chad Daybell and Lori were indicted on charges of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder in connection with the deaths of Tylee Ryan, J.J. Vallow, and Tammy Daybell, as well as grand theft by deception related to the children's deaths. The legal proceedings spanned several years, with both defendants initially pleading not guilty to all charges. Lori's trial began in April 2023 after she was found competent to stand trial. On May 12, 2023, she was found guilty on all counts related to the deaths of Tylee, JJ, and Tammy. The jury deliberated carefully before reaching their unanimous verdict on July 31, 2023. She received 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole for the murder of Tylee, the murder of JJ, and the attempted murder of Tammy, in addition to fines and restitution for grand theft charges. Judge Boyce said Lori killed her children to eliminate them as obstacles and for financial gain, choosing the most evil and destructive path possible and going down a strange religious rabbit hole to justify her murders. Before sentencing, Lori made her first public statement since her arrest. She said she had spoken to Jesus as well as to her children and Tammy, and that Tylee, JJ, and Tammy were happy and very busy in heaven. She also said, Jesus Christ knows that no one was murdered in this case. Accidental deaths still happen, and one's own life still happen, and fatal drug side effects still happen. An alternate juror in Lori's trial described Lori as a monster after seeing clear photos of Tylee and JJ, as well as wedding photos of Lori and Chad in Hawaii after they murdered the children. Judge Stephen W. Boyce addressed Lori directly during sentencing, stating that the most shocking thing was a mother killing her children, and that she still showed no remorse. He added that she still hadn't said she was sorry. He acknowledged that she might not believe she was guilty based on her religious beliefs, but explained that he was imposing the sentence in the name of justice. Colby Ryan, Lori's surviving son, spoke about the devastating impact on his family. Not only are his father, sister, and brother gone, but so is his mother. Starting 6 years ago, on May 30, 2024, a jury found Chad Daybell guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy in the deaths of Tammy, Tylee, and JJ. He was also convicted of grand theft by deception in connection with the child murders and insurance fraud in connection with Tammy. It was confirmed that the prosecution would seek the death penalty for Chad at his sentencing hearing. Chad chose not to present any mitigating evidence. On June 1, 2024, he was sentenced to death. For the insurance fraud charges, he was sentenced to 15 years in prison, each year to run concurrently with the death sentence, and $130,000 in restitution plus $300,000. Because Chad was deemed indigent, no fines were added to the insurance fraud sentence. Daybell's extended family, Matt and Heather Daybell, as well as the Boudreaux, Cox and Shiflett families, issued statements expressing their relief at the end of the Idaho trial and their thoughts for the victims. Chad has been placed in the death chamber at the Idaho Maximum Security Institution. Lori Vallow Daybell's legal troubles were far from over. She was extradited to Arizona to face additional charges. In April 2025, she was found guilty of conspiring to murder Charles Vallow. In June 2025, she was found guilty of conspiring to murder Brandon Boudreaux, Melani's ex-husband. On July 25, 2025, she received 2 additional life sentences to be served consecutively with her Idaho sentences. Judge Justin Beresky told her that she should never be released from prison, adding that she had shattered lives. He further stated that the amount of contemplation, calculation, planning, and manipulation that had gone into those crimes was unparalleled in his career. This case stands as one of the most shocking examples of how extremist religious beliefs can lead to unthinkable violence. In less than 2 years, Vallow Daybell went from being a devoted mother to a convicted killer who murdered her own children. The transformation was so complete that those who knew her could barely recognize the woman she had become. J.J. Vallow and Tammy Irion deserved so much more than the lives they were given. They deserved to grow up, to experience love, joy, and to fulfill their potential. Instead, they became victims of their mother's twisted beliefs and insatiable need for control. Naomi Irion was born on 25 June 2003 in the small town of Fernley, Lyon County, Nevada, USA. She was born into a family with 2 older brothers. Tragically, one of them died in infancy due to health problems 2 years before Naomi's birth. His death was a devastating blow to the Irion family, so much so that Diana Irion, Naomi's mother, needed psychological support. A little over a year later, Diana discovered she was pregnant again. She felt a mix of happiness and fear. This pregnancy was difficult, both emotionally and physically. Doctors identified several potential complications requiring constant monitoring at the clinic. There was a significant risk that the child wouldn't survive. Therefore, when Diana heard Naomi's first cry, she was overjoyed that she had given birth to a healthy girl. Now, the family had 2 children, a son, Casey Valley, and a daughter, Naomi, but the parents weren't planning to stop there. They wanted a large family and decided to adopt. In 2018, they adopted 3 boys. By that time, Naomi was old enough to help her mother care for her younger brothers. The Irion family's life was full of activity. Herv, the head of the family, worked as a diplomat and frequently traveled for his job. Thanks to his work, the family had the opportunity to live and travel around the world. Naomi spent time with her parents in France, Germany, Russia, and South Africa. She was inquisitive, intelligent, and easily made friends with other children. However, due to their constant moves, she didn't have the chance to form deep, lasting friendships. She maintained friendly relationships with at least one good friend in each country. In 2021, Naomi graduated from the American International School in Johannesburg. The Irion family, though well-traveled and adventurous, lived a modest lifestyle and emphasized the importance of hard work. Diana, in addition to raising her 4 children, also desired to pursue her personal interests and ambitions. Naomi was passionate about books and music. She played the ukulele and piano, enjoyed singing, and sought self-improvement. Her travels exposed her to diverse cultures. When Naomi reached adulthood, the Irion family was still living in South Africa and had no immediate plans to move. However, Naomi wanted to return to her homeland in Nevada, where her older brother Casey had already relocated. He agreed to provide her with a place to stay and help her get settled. Naomi saw this move as the beginning of her independence. She quickly found a job at a Panasonic factory in Fernley, working in the battery production department. Despite being only 18 years old, she seemed mature and ambitious, eager to achieve career success and independence. Her immediate goal was to save money. She wanted to buy her own home, as she was currently living with her brother and his girlfriend. She was also saving for college. The plant where Naomi worked was quite a distance from her home. However, she didn't need to drive all the way there. The company provided a corporate bus that picked up employees from several locations in the suburbs. One of these pickup points was near the Walmart parking lot on the outskirts of Fernley. Every morning, Naomi would drive her own car to the Walmart parking lot, wait for the bus, and then travel to the factory. After her shift, the corporate bus would drop her back at the parking lot, where she would get into her car and drive home. This routine was familiar to Naomi, as she had followed it almost every day for several months after her move. This lifestyle suited her well, and her parents supported her ambition. Her brother, at that time, was serving in the Navy, working at Apple, and pursuing his education. Naomi's day on March 12, 2022, started like any other. She woke up early and drove to the Walmart parking lot, arriving around 5 a.m. to wait for the company bus. She bought a snack at the gas station and then sat in her car. Phone records show she used social media from 9 a.m. to 5:23 a.m. Other Walmart employees waiting at the bus stop noticed something strange. Around 5:30 a.m., a man in a dark hoodie was standing near Naomi's car. By her open window, they saw Naomi and the man talking. Then, Naomi moved to the passenger seat. The man got into the driver's seat, and he drove her car out of the parking lot in an unknown direction. Initially, no one was concerned when Naomi left, assuming she was getting a ride from a friend who would return soon. But during Naomi's shift at Panasonic, her manager kept asking where she was. Her co-workers realized she hadn't arrived, which was unusual because Naomi was a dedicated employee who never missed work. She also regularly communicated with her family, her mother, father, and brother. However, everything changed. Naomi suddenly stopped responding to calls and messages from her family. After several hours of trying to reach her, her parents became worried and contacted her brother. He called the company where Naomi worked. He asked the manager to check on her. The manager informed him that Naomi hadn't come to work that day and that she had been unable to reach her by phone either. Casey had talked to Naomi just before her shift, and she seemed fine. She wasn't sick, in a bad mood, or planning anything else. Plus, Naomi was a dedicated employee who valued her job and saw it as a career opportunity. So, it seemed very strange that she would suddenly miss a workday without a valid reason or any notification. Naomi always planned her days off with management beforehand to prevent issues. If she'd been sick, she would have told her colleagues or contacted her manager and asked her brother for assistance. Since she did none of these things, her family worried something serious had happened. Casey drove around the route Naomi was supposed to take and spoke to colleagues and friends, but no one had seen her. He felt that something was wrong, so he immediately contacted law enforcement agencies with a statement about Naomi's disappearance. The police started their investigation right away. They began by interviewing Naomi's family. Casey said that the day before she disappeared, Naomi had gone on a date with a man she met on a dating app. He didn't know which app she used. The date was brief, and Naomi didn't like the man. She didn't plan to see him again, and Casey didn't think he was involved in her disappearance. Casey also mentioned that a few days earlier, Naomi had complained about abuse harassment at work. She reported it to her managers, who took care of the problem, and the person harassing her stopped. These clues were interesting to the detectives, and they were checked out. Both men had solid alibis for that morning and were ruled out as suspects. Investigators then studied Naomi's social media pages and dating site accounts, but found nothing suspicious. There were no meetings planned in the near future, no stalkers had been writing to her, and she did not have a boyfriend or problematic exes who might want to harm her. She had only recently returned to the city and hadn't yet acquired a wide circle of acquaintances. A local resident reported an abandoned car that had been parked for 3 days. Police found the car in a secluded industrial area, a few kilometers outside the city. The license plate confirmed it belonged to Naomi. However, the car was empty. Nothing of value was inside, and Naomi was nowhere to be seen. There was no note or any clue about where she might have gone. The car's location was also strange. As it was not along her normal route to work or home, it seemed someone had attempted to hide the car. The car was taken for examination, but investigators found no signs of a struggle, nor blood, fingerprints, DNA samples, or other evidence. It appeared everything had been thoroughly wiped clean. What had happened to Naomi remained a complete mystery. Given the situation, law enforcement asked the FBI for assistance. They hoped the FBI could find more evidence, possibly even identify the hooded man that other Walmart employees mentioned seeing. FBI agents then began reviewing footage from the many surveillance cameras in the Walmart parking lot. This was a long process because they had to carefully analyze hundreds of hours of video to help find Naomi quickly and get useful information. The FBI offered a $10,000 reward for credible tips that would lead to her safe return. Unfortunately, this didn't produce results right away, and they received several incorrect tips. The people of Fernley were very worried about Naomi, and they were especially scared by the idea that someone dangerous might be kidnapping young women in their town. 17 days after Naomi disappeared, the investigation took a significant turn. On the 29th of March, police received a tip that directed them to a remote area in the Churchill district, over 50 kilometers from Fernley, where Naomi was last seen. This location was sparsely populated and unfamiliar to Naomi, as she had no known connections there. The fact that the tip led investigators to this place was concerning. Detectives went to the area because a witness reported seeing a car matching the description of Naomi's vehicle there on the day she vanished. Police officers thoroughly searched the area and, after several hours, discovered a patch of disturbed earth. They found a shallow grave containing the naked body of 18-year-old Naomi Irion. A forensic examination confirmed that she had died from 2 gunshot wounds, one to the chest and one to the head. The examination also revealed she had been physically and assaulted, suffering numerous abrasions and bruises. The body was taken for an autopsy, and the tragic news was reported to Naomi's family. The hardest hit was Casey, her brother, who felt guilty for her death, believing he couldn't save her from such a terrible fate. He expressed his sorrow on social media, posting several messages. His loved ones supported him, trying to comfort him. The Irion family immediately flew to the US to organize Naomi's funeral. Now, they sought justice. Unfortunately, the police couldn't provide any specific information yet. When the disappearance case was reclassified as a brutal murder investigation, the police and the FBI redoubled their efforts to find the perpetrator. By this time, they had reviewed most of the footage from the parking lot surveillance cameras and identified the man witnesses had described. The footage showed a stranger walking around the parking lot, dressed in a gray, hooded sweatshirt, jeans, and dark shoes. He had been present since before 5 a.m., before Naomi's arrival, and appeared to be looking for something, possibly a victim, as he lingered aimlessly and seemed suspicious. At 5:24 a.m., he was spotted near Naomi's car. He watched her from a distance for several minutes before approaching the vehicle. According to the camera recordings, the attacker stood by the driver's side window for some time, exchanging a few words with Naomi. His hand remained in his pocket, and his sweatshirt was sticking out as if concealing a weapon, possibly to intimidate her into silence and prevent her from calling for help. Then, the stranger abruptly opened the door, and Naomi moved to the passenger side while he got behind the wheel. During the kidnapping, various cameras captured the perpetrator from multiple angles, allowing for a partial reconstruction of his appearance, a shaved head and a beard. Investigators believed Naomi's kidnapper was a man between 30 and 40 years old. Experts compiled a psychological profile suggesting he lived near the kidnapping site. None of Naomi's relatives recognized him. Investigators also tracked his vehicle. He had arrived at the parking lot in a pickup truck, and although the license plates were initially blurred, video cameras had recorded them. FBI agents worked to enhance the video quality and analyze the images. The license plate number of the pickup truck was determined to be owned by Troy Driver, 41. FBI agents discovered that Troy had been arrested by police in Churchill County just 4 days before Naomi's body was found. He had already been released, as there was insufficient evidence to link him to another crime. However, it was clear that the police had reason to be interested in him. Law enforcement officers focused on Troy's past, which revealed a history of violent crimes dating back to his childhood in California. At age 12, he was sentenced to community service for cruelty to animals and their murder. Just 2 years later, at 14, he encountered more legal trouble, committing several burglaries, stealing firearms, and robbing stores. Due to his age, he received a suspended sentence. However, only 10 months later, he was evicted from his home and placed in a state correctional facility for minors after attacking another teenager with a loaded firearm, presumably intending to rob him. The victim believed he was close to death. When questioned, Troy justified his behavior by saying it was easier to rob than to work. By age 15, Troy had begun drinking alcohol and using illegal substances, becoming increasingly aggressive. He was avoided by ordinary teenagers but associated with members of the criminal underworld. In April 1997, a turning point occurred when he escalated from petty crimes to armed robbery, becoming an accessory to murder. He used a firearm to shoot another man, whose body was dumped on a highway outside of town. The victim's car was stolen and later found burned. Despite carefully trying to conceal the evidence, Troy was quickly caught. He was charged with robbery, burglary, illegal possession and use of a firearm, accessory to murder, and concealment of evidence. He maintained his innocence on all counts, but was found guilty and sentenced to 15 years in prison. Troy was not known for exemplary behavior, but he was released on parole after 12 years and spent the following 2 years under supervision. During this period, he appeared to be on the path to reform. He began working legally, even attempting to start a family, but without success. By 2014, law enforcement had ceased close monitoring. Believing he no longer posed a threat to society, it remains unknown how many crimes Troy committed in the years leading up to 2022 without being caught. In 2022, he became a suspect in the murder of 18-year-old Naomi Irion. The crime appeared to be an act of unprovoked aggression. Troy did not know his victim, and according to witnesses, she had not provoked him in any way. Troy worked as an excavator driver and lived with his girlfriend in a small town in Nevada. Law enforcement officers interviewed her, and she was cooperative. She stated that Troy had gone hiking on the 11th of March and 12th and was absent during those days. While she initially took this calmly, as Troy enjoyed walks and active sports, she found it suspicious that he had left his mobile phone at home, suggesting he might have been trying to conceal illegal activities. She revealed that Troy had an unhealthy fascination with serial killers. He constantly read books and listened to podcasts about them in his free time. However, he didn't exhibit cruelty in his personal life, so she had no idea he was capable of such violence. Investigators discovered that, shortly before the attack on Naomi, Troy had spoken with the daughter of a friend who was also an employee of the company where Naomi worked. Troy had questioned her about the bus service that Panasonic used to transport its employees. He inquired about the route, stops, how long it waited for employees, departure times, and even the number of people on board when the bus was full. He claimed This interest stemmed from his desire to get a job there, but the true, frightening motive was later revealed. Investigators had irrefutable evidence that he committed this terrible crime. After forensic examination of Naomi's body, a DNA sample of the perpetrator was found, which matched Troy's profile. He had killed and abused her. The police immediately arrested him. Troy Driver was charged with murder, first-degree kidnapping, robbery, abuse, burglary of a motor vehicle, and concealing evidence. Troy pleaded not guilty to all charges. Bail was set at $750,000, but he could not afford it and was held in custody. A long trial ensued, in which Naomi's family participated. The reconstruction of events suggested that early in the morning, Troy was lurking in the Walmart parking lot with one goal: to kill. Naomi seemed like an ideal victim to him. She was sitting alone in her car, and no one else was around besides other people waiting in the parking lot. He likely believed that no one would notice him. When Troy approached Naomi's car, he immediately threatened her with a gun. She became frightened and moved to the passenger seat, allowing him to get behind the wheel. She did not call for help, perhaps hoping that the criminal only wanted valuables. He drove her car to a remote location in Churchill County, where he killed and abused her at gunpoint. He buried her in a shallow grave. Afterward, he drove her car to a prearranged location where his pickup truck was parked. He ditched Naomi's car and drove away in his pickup. He later changed the tires on his pickup truck to cover his tracks. The investigation revealed that the burial site had been prepared in advance, excavated about a month before Naomi's abduction. This indicated that Troy had been planning the murder for a long time. During his pre-trial detention, several significant events unfolded. On August 18, 2022, detectives received a letter of confession, purportedly written by Troy. He had initially sent it to his ex-girlfriend, who then passed it on to investigators. The note was never fully made public. However, based on shared excerpts, Troy expressed something akin to regret. He stated that he did not know Naomi, but considered her easy prey. He also admitted in the note that his actions were not abuse-motivated. This message was more than just an apology. 2 days later, Troy tried to end one's own life but survived. For the rest of 2022, he was moved between different prisons for psychiatric evaluations and was closely watched to prevent further suicide attempts. Even though he tried to harm himself, Troy was declared mentally competent and able to go to trial. On March 7, 2023, he attempted to end one's own life again. This time, by cutting himself again. The attempt failed. He cited the isolation in prison as the reason for his actions. In June 2023, he was discharged from the isolation ward and transferred to a maximum security prison, where he was to remain until the start of his hearing, scheduled for the end of 2023. On the 6th of August of that year, guards observed that Troy was behaving normally, going about his usual routine, and they noticed nothing unusual. During a routine inspection at 5:22 p.m., less than an hour before the next round at 6:17 p.m., Troy was found in his cell with no signs of life. Resuscitation effort failed, and Troy Driver was pronounced dead due to self-strangulation. This time, his attempt was successful. Following his death, the county sheriff held a press conference to express his condolences to the Irion family. He reiterated that they had irrefutable evidence against Troy and that his conviction at the end of the trial was inevitable. Regardless of the defense presented, the DNA evidence would have ensured he spent the rest of his life in prison. The sheriff emphasized that Troy's actions only confirmed that he was a cowardly and pathetic person. However, this offered little consolation to Naomi's relatives, who had wanted to look him in the eye during the trial and hear the judge's verdict. In any case, this dangerous man would no longer be able to harm anyone. It was late on a warm spring night in El Paso, Texas. 4 teenage boys were walking home from a party. Headlights appeared, a car slowing behind them. Moments later, gunfire shattered the silence. 2 of the boys fell. The others ran. When the chaos subsided, the streets were stained with blood. The events that followed would lead to one of the most controversial cases in Texas history, culminating in a confession that changed a young man's life forever. Daniel Villegas was born in April 1977 in El Paso, Texas, a border city shaped by cultural richness and complex social realities. Raised by his mother, Yolanda, in a large, close-knit family, Daniel grew up surrounded by love, laughter, and strong neighborhood connections. From an early age, he stood out for his cheerful, extroverted nature and his playful habit of telling wildly exaggerated stories. It was this light-hearted spirit that made him popular among friends. Less so academic achievements or ambition. Instead, his laid-back charm and sense of humor drew people to him. At 16, Daniel was navigating the ordinary rhythms of teenage life, weekends filled with small neighborhood parties, idle afternoons on the streets, endless conversations about music, cars, and the latest gossip. However, in the early 1992nd, El Paso faced hidden challenges. Gang activity increased, and the public wanted immediate solutions. Police felt pressured to quickly solve major crimes, even if it meant overlooking certain details. This tense environment dramatically altered Daniel's life. On the night of the 10th of April, 1993, Good Friday, 4 teenage boys were walking home from a party in northeast El Paso. As they made their way down Electric Street, a brown car slowly approached them from behind, creating a sense of unease. The car veered off briefly, then returned moments later, its headlights now off. Without warning, shots rang out from the back seat. Panic erupted. Bullets tore through the quiet night, striking 2 of the teenagers. 18-year-old Bobby England was shot in the head and died instantly. 17-year-old Armando Mando Lazo was hit in the abdomen and leg. He ran for about 100 meters before collapsing and dying near a neighbor's home. The 2 surviving boys, Jesse Hernandez and Juan Carlos Medina, escaped, unharmed but terrified. Police arrived to find a chaotic scene, 2 young men dead, no eyewitnesses able to identify the shooter, and the only physical evidence being .22 caliber shell casings. The city was shaken. Local media quickly dubbed it the Good Friday shooting, and pressure mounted for answers. With no fingerprints, no murder weapon, no DNA, and no suspects, detectives turned to the most readily available tool in their arsenal: forced confessions. They began interrogating local teenagers with any ties to gang activity. Among them was David, who told investigators that his cousin, Daniel Villegas, had once joked about being the shooter. That single, offhand comment was enough for police to act. On the 22nd of April, just 12 days after the murders, 16-year-old Daniel was arrested and taken into custody. He was interrogated for hours alone, without a lawyer or parent present, under intense psychological pressure, intimidation, and fear. Daniel eventually broke. He signed a written confession detailing the shooting. Even though the account was riddled with inconsistencies and inaccuracies, the moment he left the room, he recanted the confession to a probation officer, insisting he had lied out of fear. But it was too late. Daniel's coerced statement became the cornerstone of the prosecution's case. Despite lacking any physical evidence, he was charged with capital murder. His first trial, which took place in December 1994, ended with a hung jury because the jurors couldn't agree on a verdict. Several witnesses, including his cousin David, recanted their earlier claims. A forensic psychiatrist testified that Daniel had emotional vulnerabilities and signs of mild intellectual disability, but in a second trial held in August 1995, everything changed. With the same coerced confession as the centerpiece of the case, and despite the recantations, Daniel Villegas was found guilty of murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In 1997, all appeals had been denied. Daniel, once a spirited, playful teenager, now faced a future behind bars. Life in prison was brutal, as he endured violence, isolation, and psychological trauma. Yet, somehow, through it all, he never gave up hope. Behind prison walls, Daniel faced more than a wrongful conviction. He also faced fatherhood. His first daughter was born while he was still navigating the early stages of his legal battle. The details about his partner remained largely private, but years later, Daniel would admit that his absence strained the relationship, creating a painful distance that he carried with him. Despite the isolation and hardship, Daniel was never truly alone. His mother, Yolanda, remained a constant source of strength, visiting, writing, and standing by his side through every setback. Her steadfast support will be crucial in the years to come. By 2007, after more than a decade behind bars, a spark of hope appeared. John Mimbella, a local construction businessman who had married into Daniel's extended family, John immersed himself in the case, reading transcripts, police reports, and trial documents. He quickly became convinced that Daniel had not only been coerced into confessing, but that no physical evidence linked him to the crime at all. John approached the district attorney with his findings, only to be dismissed. Undeterred, he launched his own campaign for justice. He filed a writ of habeas corpus, arguing that Daniel had received ineffective legal representation at trial. The petition was later expanded to include a declaration of actual innocence that was bolstered by new witness statements. Among those who came forward was Jesse Hernandez, one of the surviving victims from the 1993 shooting. Upon reading Daniel's so-called confession for the first time, Jesse publicly questioned its authenticity, stating that it didn't read like something written by someone who had actually been at the scene. In a stunning revelation, Jesse also disclosed that the same detective who had interrogated Daniel had pressured him with similar tactics, threats, and fear, to the point that Jesse, a victim himself, almost confessed to a crime he hadn't committed. Daniel's cousin, David Rangel, also recanted, admitting he wasn't sure whether Daniel had been joking when he supposedly confessed to the crime years ago. Adding to the growing body of new evidence, investigators uncovered information about two local gang members, including Rudy Flores, who had reportedly threatened one of the victims weeks before the shooting. According to witnesses, Flores later bragged about being involved. Armed with these revelations, John intensified his efforts. He organized fundraisers and brought in civil rights groups to help mount a serious legal defense. Together with Daniel's family, they staged protests, put up billboards, and painted messages on car windows throughout El Paso, demanding Daniel's release. Their pressure worked. In 2011, a series of hearings were held to re-examine the case. The defense laid out the inconsistencies between Daniel's confession and the physical evidence. They also highlighted the questionable tactics used by the police, especially during the interrogations of Daniel, Jesse, and Juan, the other surviving witness, none of whom had ever identified Daniel as the shooter in court. A key moment came when Rudy Flores, now considered a possible suspect, invoked his right not to testify. Finally, in August 2012, a judge reviewed the new evidence and issued a recommendation. Daniel Villegas should be granted a new trial. The court ruled that his confession had been coerced, that his defense had been inadequate, and that new evidence pointed to other suspects. Though the state initially appealed, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals upheld the ruling in December 2013 and overturned Daniel's conviction. Not long after, the judge formally suppressed the confession, calling it unreliable and improperly obtained. In January 2014, Daniel Villegas was released on bond after serving almost 20 years in prison. While incarcerated, he received a letter from Amanda Enriquez, who had read his story in the news and wanted to offer him support. Their correspondence led to a strong connection based on faith, hope, and the belief in redemption. After Daniel was freed, they married and had 3 children. Unlike his experience with his first daughter, whom he had seen grow up only from a distance because of his imprisonment, she was in her 20s by the time he was released. Daniel was now able to be present for the births of his children. Rebuilding his relationship with his first daughter was challenging, a source of lasting regret for Daniel. Even though Daniel's confession had been thrown out and there was no physical evidence connecting him to the crime, the district attorney decided to try him a 3rd time, a decision that sparked controversy. This trial was especially critical for Daniel, who now had a wife and 3 young children. He had experienced freedom and was trying to rebuild his life, but the 1993 shooting still hung over him, and he feared another guilty verdict would send him back to prison permanently. In a moving interview, Daniel, alongside his wife Amanda and their children, revealed the toll the past 2 decades had taken. Despite this, he spoke with a determined yet cautious hope, understanding that his family was both his motivation to fight and his biggest weakness. The 3rd trial would be the final chapter in a saga that began when he was just a teenager. In October 2018, Daniel Villegas returned to court for the 3rd and final trial that would determine his fate. This time, the controversial confession that had once sealed his conviction was no longer admissible. For the first time, Daniel would be judged without the words that had been forced from him decades earlier. Midway through the proceedings, the prosecution extended an offer, a plea deal. Legally, it would allow Daniel to maintain his innocence while still accepting a guilty verdict. In return, he would walk free. On paper, it was a tempting deal. After 4 years out on bond, Daniel had rebuilt his life. He had a wife, young children, a job, and a fragile sense of normalcy. But accepting the plea also meant shouldering the permanent weight of a murder conviction, something he had already carried unjustly for more than 2 decades. He knew that while the plea might guarantee his freedom, it would forever stain his name. In that moment of doubt, another exoneree stepped forward. Jason Baldwin, one of the West Memphis 3, who had taken an Alford plea himself years earlier, urged Daniel not to compromise, to take the stand, face the trial, and fight for full exoneration. Daniel made a decision. He would not admit to a crime he didn't commit. Not again. Not ever. The stakes were enormous. The fear of returning to prison haunted Daniel and his wife, but they agreed on a strategy to let the prosecution present its case without interruption. The defense made the bold choice not to introduce new evidence or call any witnesses, not even Daniel himself. It was a calculated move. They believed the prosecution's case had no real foundation without the confession, and that presenting a defense might only validate a narrative that had no business being in court. The true risk wasn't a conviction, but a hung jury. Another mistrial could drag the process out indefinitely, forcing Daniel and his family to relive the trauma once more. While the jury deliberated, Daniel retreated to a private room at the courthouse with his 6-month-old daughter. Cradling her in his arms, he whispered a promise. She was too young to understand that her father was innocent, that one day she would know the truth. And then, after hours of waiting, justice finally arrived. The courtroom fell silent as the verdict was read. Not guilty, Daniel Villegas, 41, broke down in tears and knelt as applause filled the courtroom. After more than 25 years, he was finally free and proven innocent. The jury had recognized the truth that the courts had missed for so long. Despite the verdict, the district attorney's office maintained that Daniel was guilty. They argued that he was the only suspect, but the case was legally closed, and they had no basis to appeal. Daniel had been exonerated. Freedom wasn't easy, even after prison. Although cleared of all charges, Daniel still struggled. He received online threats and found it hard to be involved in his children's school activities because of his past wrongful conviction. He relied on his loyal supporters for help. John Mimbella, the businessman who led the campaign to prove Daniel's innocence, gave him a job as a construction foreman. Later, John helped Daniel find work at a law office. Daniel didn't stop at just being exonerated. He started sharing his experience by speaking at universities, conferences, and local events. He talked about how a flawed system unjustly imprisoned him as a teenager and how his faith, family, and determination helped him regain his freedom. Daniel Villegas became an important symbol, representing the tragic impact of wrongful convictions. His story was featured in documentaries, news reports, and podcasts, all detailing the life of a young man who dedicated half his life to proving his innocence. But for Daniel, freedom wasn't the end of the journey. It was the beginning of a new battle, one for healing, justice, and dignity. In July 2024, Daniel Villegas's situation took another surprising turn. On the 17th of July, he was arrested in El Paso, Texas, for domestic assault. Police reports indicate they responded to a call about a domestic dispute at an apartment in northeast El Paso, near a school. A woman, whose name was not released in court documents, claimed Daniel grabbed her wrist during an argument, causing her pain. Police observed what appeared to be dry blood and scratches on her wrist and forearm. Daniel was taken to the El Paso County Jail, but was released later that day after posting a $2,500 bond. This news greatly surprised the community. For many, the name Daniel Villegas was synonymous with injustice. Now, he faced a new accusation, one that risked reigniting public doubt. But unlike his past ordeal, this case followed a very different path. After a 2-day trial, a jury found Daniel not guilty of the charge. His attorney criticized the district attorney's office, calling the case baseless and irresponsible. Daniel was already involved in a federal lawsuit filed in 2015 against the city of El Paso and several police officers. In this civil case, he claimed his constitutional rights were violated. He alleged that detectives forced him to falsely confess when he was 16 and hid evidence that could have proven his innocence. As of mid-2025, the lawsuit was still ongoing in the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Texas, but a trial date had not been scheduled. The amount of compensation Daniel might receive was not public, but Texas records showed that wrongful conviction cases cost the state up to $80,000, and sometimes more. For Daniel, the lawsuit wasn't about the money. It was about getting back the years he lost and escaping the false label the system had given him. He missed out on his prime years, his 20s and 30s, spending them in prison while life went on without him. This caused emotional harm that continued to affect him after his release. The social stigma, distrust, and suspicion he faced made it hard to rebuild his life. Despite the challenges, Daniel persevered. He stayed in El Paso, working to support his family and rebuild his life. With the ongoing support of his friend and mentor, John, he maintained stable employment and had chances to speak publicly about the risks of coerced confessions and judicial errors. He frequently spoke at university events, sharing his story to encourage change and amplify the voices of those still caught in the flawed system. His case served as a stark reminder of the consequences of hasty and negligent justice, but it also became an inspiring story of resilience. demonstrating the strength of family, faith, and determination. Daniel Villegas fought for his freedom and the chance to rebuild his life, free from a past he didn't create. Even after being proven innocent, his challenges continued. He faced daily obstacles, including rejection, suspicion, and doubt, but he met them with quiet determination. Daniel's story highlights the shortcomings of the American justice system. He now speaks out for those who are still wrongly imprisoned, those whose stories may be similar to his, but remain unheard. The most disturbing question is, how many more innocent people like Daniel are still in prison, hoping someone will believe them? On the 3rd of February, 2018, Alyssa, an 18-year-old from Everett, Washington, kissed her mum goodbye and headed out to a party. She packed a bag with extra clothes, a sign that she planned to stay over. The party was at a mobile home near Martha Lake, just a short drive from her home in Everett. Parties like this weren't unusual for Alyssa. She loved hanging out with friends, catching up, and just being 18, her mum, Gina Pearson, knew where she was going and trusted her to stay safe. But as the hours ticked by, something felt off. Alyssa was born on the 25th of August, 1999, in Everett, Washington, a working-class city about 25 miles north of Seattle. As the firstborn child of Gina, Alyssa grew up with a younger sister. Gina described Alyssa as outgoing, smart, and determined, a young woman with a vibrant personality who made friends easily. Alyssa attended Mariner High School in Everett, a public school known for its diverse student body, but like many teenagers, her path wasn't perfectly linear. Around 2016 or 2017, she took a break from high school for about a year. Instead of staying idle, she got a job at a pizza restaurant on Whidbey Island, a scenic spot across Puget Sound. From Everett, the job wasn't easy. She had to commute by ferry from Mukilteo, a trip that could take over an hour each way, depending on the schedule. It was a grind, but Alyssa stuck with it, showing her work ethic and independence. That job was more than just a paycheck for Alyssa. It was a step toward figuring out her future. According to her mum, Alyssa was proud of the responsibility and the chance to earn her own money. She'd always been close to her family, especially her little sister. Gina often spoke of Alyssa's determination, noting how she balanced work with her plans to return to school. In early 2018, Alyssa had started gathering paperwork to re-enroll at Mariner High School. Her goal was to graduate alongside her friends, a milestone she was excited to reach. Outside of work and school, Alyssa was a typical 18-year-old. She loved hanging out with friends, whether it was catching up over food or just chilling together. Everett was her home base, a place where she felt comfortable navigating the local scene, coffee shops, parks, and the occasional party. Alyssa wasn't perfect, but she had a drive to keep moving forward, whether it was through her job, her plans for school, or her relationships with family and friends. On the evening of the 3rd of February, 2018, Alyssa was getting ready to go out. Earlier that day, she told her mum, Gina, that she was going to a party at a mobile home in the 400 block of Lakeview Road near Martha Lake, only a few miles from home. This was just another weekend hangout, nothing out of the ordinary. She yelled out to her family, saying she loved them before heading out. As Gina later recalled, it was a small moment, but one she would always hold on to. Martha Lake is a quiet, suburban area in Linwood, about 15 miles north of Seattle. The mobile home park where the party took place was typical for the area: tightly packed homes and families, with young people living side by side. The party was at a residence within this neighborhood, a spot where local teens and young adults often gathered. Alyssa knew people there, felt comfortable enough to bring an overnight bag, and likely expected a night of music, conversation, and perhaps some drinks. Parties like this were common for her crowd friends catching up, some letting loose after a long week. Alyssa arrives at the trailer and joins a group of young people At a casual party, there was music, conversation, and banned substance. As the night wore on, something went wrong. The next morning, the 4th of February, she wasn't answering her phone, which was unusual for someone who typically stayed in touch with her mum. Gina later told reporters she had a bad feeling when Alyssa left that night but hadn't acted on it. Alyssa's friends, too, lost track of her. No one could say exactly when or why she stopped engaging with the group. By the 5th of February, Gina grew worried because she hadn't heard from Alyssa in almost 2 days. She posted on Facebook, urgently asking for help. Alyssa's silence was unusual and frightening. Her sister, mother, and friends were all worried about her whereabouts and well-being. The reason for her disappearance remained a mystery. Hidden in that mobile home near Martha Lake, friends who'd been at the party were questioned informally by Gina and others. But no one could pinpoint exactly when Alyssa was last seen. The lack of answers pushed Gina to contact the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office, turning her personal search into an official missing persons case. The police started investigating Alyssa's disappearance. Court documents show detectives interviewed party attendees to reconstruct Alyssa's timeline. Initially, the investigation was unclear because partygoers provided uncertain or contradictory information, and no one could confirm if Alyssa left the mobile home or remained there. The investigation took a critical turn when police received a tip. Court records show that someone who'd heard details about the party contacted authorities, raising concerns about what might have happened to Alyssa. The tip pointed detectives back to the mobile home, suggesting that the answers to Alyssa's disappearance were still inside. Then, an important information was reported. A man who introduced himself as Brian Varela's colleague said that Alyssa collapsed in Varela's bedroom during a party on the 3rd of February, 2018, after consuming prohibited substances. On February 8, 2018, the police returned to the residence with a warrant. What they found there changed the case from a missing persons report to something far more serious. Alyssa's body was discovered in the residence, hidden in a plastic crate in a bedroom. Brian Varela, 19, was arrested at his mobile home in the 400 block of Lakeview Road, Linwood. The discovery was shattering. The mobile home, once a casual party spot, was now a crime scene, and the investigation shifted from finding Alyssa to understanding how she died. Detectives began processing the scene meticulously. The Snohomish County Medical Examiner's Office was called in to determine the cause of death. On the 17th of April, 2018, the medical examiner released their findings. Alyssa's death was ruled accidental, caused by an overdose from a combination of 2 illicit substances. The report didn't point to foul play in the overdose itself, but the circumstances surrounding her death raised serious questions. The evidence pointed to a tragic sequence of events. Alyssa had been at the party, socializing in a bedroom with others. When she consumed illicit substances, she collapsed shortly after. That night, Varela, instead of calling 911, he took semi-nude photos of her, texting them to friends with the message, "He thinks she dead, still breathing." He admitted to abusing her while she was unconscious. He searched online for what to do if someone overdoses, but ignored advice to seek help. By the morning of the 4th of February, Varela woke to find Alyssa dead, her lips blue and body cold. He showed her body to his co-worker, who urged him to call police, but Varela refused. Brian saying Alyssa died after being intimate with him and admitting that he was unsure if she was alive during the attack. Varela used Alyssa's thumb to unlock her iPhone, posting, "I'm out, bye," on her Snapchat to suggest she'd run away. He washed her body to remove DNA evidence, broke her leg to fit her into a plastic crate obtained from his mother's nearby home, and planned to bury her near Marysville with onions to mask the odor. Intending to flee to Mexico, Brian's co-worker after seeing Gina's Facebook post about Alyssa's disappearance, reported it to the police, leading to Brian Varela's arrest and Alyssa's body being discovered that same day during a search of the mobile home for Alyssa's family. The news of her death was unbearable. Gina, who had been searching tirelessly since Alyssa's disappearance, was devastated. Gina was 16 when she became pregnant with Alyssa, and there were parallels between Alyssa's youth and her own. She kind of saw what Alyssa went through. The judicial process unfolded in Snohomish County Superior Court on the 9th of February, 2018. Brian Varela was charged with first-degree manslaughter, second-degree abuse, and controlled substance homicide. With bail set at $500,000, court records highlight the prosecution's challenge. Washington law did not criminalize failing to seek help for an overdose unless the victim was a child, elderly, or pregnant, making first-degree manslaughter difficult to prove. Proving second-degree abuse was also difficult due to legal definitions surrounding consent and unconsciousness. On the 20th of September, 2018, Varela pleaded guilty to reduced charges in a plea deal: second-degree manslaughter, third-degree abuse, and unlawful disposal of remains. Amistemianor, deputy prosecutor, explained that the deal ensured a conviction, as a trial risked an acquittal on the original charges due to legal constraints. The sentencing hearing on the 15th of November, 2018, was emotional. Alyssa's family and friends filled the courtroom, many wearing Justice for Alyssa hoodies, some featuring her image and angel wings. Gina spoke tearfully, calling the plea deal a slap on the wrist. Brian's defense argued for leniency, citing his lack of a prior criminal record and his guilty plea as evidence of remorse. However, prosecutors pushed for the maximum sentence, with deputy prosecutor condemning Varela's complete disregard for Alyssa's life. Superior Court Judge Linda Crease expressed frustration, telling the court she was surprised, even outraged, that the maximum penalty for someone with no prior record was 34 months. She noted that even some auto thefts carry heavier sentences. On November 15, 2018, Judge Linda Crease sentenced Varela to 34 months in prison, the maximum allowed. The sentence marked the end of the legal proceedings, but for Alyssa's family, it fell far short of justice. Outside the courtroom, the community's reaction echoed the family's frustration. The friends and neighbors were stunned by the short sentence. Given the details of the case, Alyssa was remembered as a local girl who worked hard at a pizza restaurant on Whidbey Island and dreamed of a brighter future. The outcome sparked conversations about the dangers of prohibited substances and the need for legal reforms. Gina Pearson vowed to take action. She planned to push for changes in Washington's laws to hold people accountable for failing to seek help in overdose cases. Her advocacy was driven by a desire to prevent other families from experiencing the same heartbreak. This tragedy highlighted how quickly a night out could turn deadly. The 19th of March, 2016, 8:21 am. Surveillance footage captures 15-year-old Paige Doherty, neatly groomed, backpack over her shoulders, pushing open the glass door of a small store on a busy street in Clydebank, Scotland. She steps inside, the door slowly shuts behind her, and that's the last time anyone sees her. It was a normal Saturday morning, just like any other. But then, something happened that would deeply affect Paige's family, friends, and the whole town. What seemed familiar and safe, a local shop, its friendly owner, and a well-known street, became unsettling. Within a few hours, Paige's family knew something was wrong. Paige Doherty was born on April 17, 2000, in Clydebank, Scotland. Even as a young child, she was known for her kindness and maturity. She was always smiling, thoughtful, and friendly, making it easy for her to connect with people of all ages. Paige didn't seek the spotlight, but her presence was always noticed. As the oldest of 4 children, she naturally felt responsible for her siblings, Paige's mother, Pamela Doherty, and stepfather, Andrew, raised the family together. Their home was always lively, and despite facing challenges, the family shared a strong bond of love and closeness. Paige deeply loved her younger siblings. She wasn't simply responsible for them, she genuinely cared about them. She had a particularly strong bond with her younger brother, Andy, who had special needs. Paige frequently took him to the park or the cinema. These outings were important and rewarding for both of them. Paige knew from a young age that she wanted to be a hairstylist and beauty expert. She was fascinated by fashion and personal style, enjoying makeup, hairstyling, and keeping up with the latest trends. By the time she was 15, her goals were clear. When a local salon offered her a Saturday job, she embraced the opportunity, seeing it as the start of her career, not just a part-time job. Her colleagues found her to be punctual, respectful, and always ready to learn. Paige enjoyed a lively social life, often sharing photos and showcasing her beauty skills on social media. While she had many acquaintances, her best friend was Lauren. They were very close, enjoying sleepovers, deep conversations, sharing secrets, and making plans for the future. Paige also had a boyfriend named Dylan, and their relationship, though new, was meaningful. They communicated constantly, texting and calling each other daily, openly shared their thoughts, feelings. Paige trusted Dylan and felt he genuinely cared about her. They both found it difficult to be apart. Even for a single day, Paige lived a simple yet meaningful life. Although she had big dreams, she never wanted to leave her hometown. She didn't see success as escaping her roots. Instead, she wanted to build a fulfilling life in the place where she grew up. Her actions proved this. She worked hard, learned continuously, helped people, and showed compassion, which is what she truly desires. In the Clydebank community, at first glance, John Leatham seemed like a typical member of the stable and respected middle class. At 32 years old, he was a local business owner, married and raising a young daughter. His wife, Kaja, was originally from Poland. From the outside, their life looked quiet and comfortable. A modest home near his workplace, a steady routine, caring for their daughter, going for walks. It all gave off an image of reliability. John was known in the neighborhood as a polite and composed man. He owned Delicious Deli, a small store that combined a corner store, mini cafe, and deli counter. Its location on a busy street near homes and a bus stop made it popular with locals, students, and workers. John often served customers himself. Chatting with many, he recognized he was friendly, rarely showing irritation, and never being disrespectful. Regular customers didn't suspect anything unusual about him. He seemed quiet, neat, and a bit reserved, but not in a worrying way. Delicious Deli had a good reputation. It was clean, well-stocked, and reliably open. Behind John's image as a reliable family man was a hidden truth. He had a twin brother named George. Few people knew about George, and unlike John, George had a criminal record. In 2003, at 19 years old, George was convicted of a serious crime. He ambushed a woman, dragged her into the bushes, and assaulted her. He received a suspended sentence of 3 years, was ordered to do community service, and had to register as an abuse offender. Years later, George's behavior hadn't changed. In 2016, just before a court hearing, he caused another incident. He appeared drunk near a gas station, carrying a knife and metal batons, threatened people. He was soon arrested again. In 2019, he assaulted his pregnant wife at home while intoxicated, causing her serious injuries. He was then sentenced to 9 months in prison. Unlike his brother George, John had no criminal record, allowing him to cultivate a perfect public image as a calm and reliable businessman. But as investigators investigated the current case, they discovered a hidden side of John, a man capable of sudden, uncontrollable aggression. This discovery placed the Latham family under intense public scrutiny. John's wife had never suspected anything was wrong. However, the image of John as a family man and shop owner was just a facade. The Latham family had a complex and disturbing history that few understood. The contrast between John's calm exterior and hidden tension ultimately led to a tragic event that shocked Clydebank. On the evening of March 18, 2016, Paige Doherty had a sleepover at her best friend Lauren's house. Because she had to work early the next morning, she set her alarm to wake up in time to catch her bus. The next morning, March 19, Paige woke up on time. She said goodbye to Lauren and left to walk to the bus stop. She normally stopped at Ashy's store, where she'd known him since childhood, to buy a sandwich or drink before work. However, this day was different. She waved to Ashy as she passed his store, but didn't go in. Instead, she continued down the street to John Latham's store, just a short distance away. At 8:21 am, surveillance footage showed Paige entering John's deli. That was the last time anyone saw her. She vanished without a trace. When Paige didn't show up at the salon for her shift, alarm bells rang immediately. Her co-workers knew she took her responsibilities seriously. She never ran late or missed a shift without notice. The team at the salon tried calling her but couldn't get through. Her phone was turned off. They contacted her mother, Pamela, to let her know. Worry quickly turned into fear. Pamela is unable to contact Paige, which is completely out of character for her. Paige always replied to texts and calls, especially from those closest to her. At the same time, her boyfriend Dylan was also trying to reach her. None of his messages had been read. Growing increasingly concerned, he called the salon to check if she'd arrived. When he found out that Paige hadn't shown up and no one had heard from her, his concern turned into panic. Dylan and Pamela both began checking Paige's social media accounts. She was always active online, posting updates, replying to friends, and sharing photos. But that day, there was nothing. No updates, no posts, no replies. The silence online only deepened their fear. This has never happened before. Hours went by. Still, no word. It became clear that this wasn't just a case of running late or a minor misunderstanding. Her family and friends knew by then that something serious had happened. Pamela contacted law enforcement right away. Given the circumstances and everything they knew about Paige, authorities treated the situation as a high-risk disappearance from the start. The first phase of the search began. Family, friends, salon co-workers, and even neighbors joined efforts, calling everyone they knew, printing flyers, and looking for any possible clue. But at this stage, not a single lead came through. Paige had vanished in a matter of minutes. No one could have known that a simple decision to stop by a corner deli would turn out to be life-altering. Meanwhile, law enforcement worked in parallel, conducting interviews. They mapped out Paige's likely path from Lauren's house to the bus stop and tried to determine who might have seen her that morning. Shop owners along the way were questioned, and surveillance footage from nearby businesses was reviewed. Any deviation from her usual route drew attention. A day passed, but there was still no new information. The lack of witnesses, signs, or physical evidence only made the situation more tense. The only solid window investigators had was that brief period when Paige was walking down the street and entered one of the stores. The search for Paige Doherty continued for 2 full days. Her family, volunteers, and the police never gave up hope of finding her alive. However, on the morning of the 21st of March, 2016, that hope was shattered. Her body was discovered by two passers-by, walking along an overgrown roadside area about a mile from the bus stop she had been heading toward that Saturday morning. The location was difficult to access due to the thick brush and infrequent travel, which explained why her body hadn't been found sooner. The two passers-by spotted a suspicious-looking black bag on the ground. Upon closer inspection, they realized there was a body inside. Law enforcement arrived quickly and secured the area. Even during the initial inspection, it was clear the girl had died from multiple knife wounds. Later findings would reveal just how brutal the attack had been. Forensic examiners counted 146 sharp force injuries on Paige's body, 61 of which were direct stab wounds. The remaining injuries were consistent with defensive wounds sustained during a struggle. Her arms and forearms showed the heaviest damage, proof that Paige fought back with everything she had. She was barely 5 feet tall, but she fought for her life. Some of the injuries to her head and neck were especially targeted and repetitive. One deep slash to the neck had severed the carotid artery, causing massive bleeding. According to experts, this was the fatal wound. The level of aggression involved in the crime left no doubt that this wasn't a random act or a robbery gone wrong. It was deeply personal and emotionally charged. The investigators quickly determined that this was not a random attack. The extreme violence, the specific wounds, and the force used suggested the attacker knew Paige. The crime was committed with intense rage, a common element in crimes motivated by personal reasons. The location where Paige's body was found was also suspicious. It was hidden from the road, requiring effort to reach, which indicated premeditation. The person responsible either knew the area or had planned the location in advance to conceal the crime. The way the body was wrapped and placed suggested it had been moved to that location after Paige died. News of Paige's body being found spread quickly. It was a terrible shock for all those who had been searching for her. Paige's family was informed, and her mother, Pamela, found it hard to believe. Dylan and Lauren was completely stunned. The volunteers who had helped by putting up posters and sharing information online now posted messages of sadness and support. The whole community mourned her loss. Meanwhile, police are still actively analyzing surveillance footage and speaking to anyone who may have seen Paige on the day she disappeared. Their goal is to retrace her final steps and identify the last person to see her. It became clear that this crime had either been planned or carried out by someone who was sure they could erase all traces. But in a town where nearly every corner store and intersection had surveillance, disappearing entirely was almost impossible. Detectives requested footage from all surveillance cameras along her usual route from Lauren's home to the bus stop. Two locations stood out: Fleming Food Store, where she typically grabbed breakfast, and the neighboring deli, Delicious Deli, where she had stopped that morning. The breakthrough came after Ashi, owner of Fleming Food Store, called the police. He remembered seeing Paige that morning. She waved at him, but didn't come into the store, which struck him as unusual. Remembering that his security system had a wide-angle view, he reviewed the footage. The footage clearly shows Paige walking down the street and entering the Delicious Deli store next door. However, the footage did not capture her leaving. Ashi immediately shared the video with the police. Investigators studied the footage closely and found that at 8:21 a.m., Paige walked into Delicious Deli. For more than an hour afterward, no one was seen exiting. Then, at 9:58 the cameras captured John Leatham locking up the shop, pulling down the shutters, and leaving in a hurry. He crossed the street to another store where he purchased disinfectant, bleach, and heavy-duty trash bags. This was confirmed by both surveillance footage and the store clerk, who noted how anxious the customer appeared. At 10:03 a.m., the cameras caught John again, returning to the deli with his purchases. Not long after, he emerged, carrying a large black bag. from which the footage clearly showed a foot in a white sock sticking out. Investigators now realized they were witnessing what looked like an attempt to dispose of a body, but this was only one part of a disturbing sequence of events caught on tape. Instead of driving away, John returned to the store multiple times over the next 2 hours, going in and out repeatedly. During that time, he tried to clean the space, scrub away blood, and get rid of evidence. Cameras captured his movements, facial expressions, and gestures. He appeared frantic and disoriented. At one point, he even changed clothes and casually reopened the deli to serve customers as if nothing had happened. A police unit was dispatched immediately to make the arrest. Within 10 hours of receiving the footage, investigators had enough evidence to take him into custody. John Leatham was arrested and brought in for questioning. Meanwhile, forensic experts thoroughly investigated his shop. It seemed clean initially, but after moving refrigerators and display cases, they discovered bloodstains under the shelves. Tests proved the blood was Paige Doherty's. This new evidence consistently made John's situation worse. While arresting John, investigators kept collecting evidence. They examined his car and discovered blood, even though someone had clearly tried to clean it. Forensic analysis of the area where Paige's body was found confirmed that John's car was there the day he dumped the body. At this stage, his guilt was certain. Surveillance footage had become the key piece of evidence. It showed who last saw Paige, how the suspect behaved, and the step-by-step effort he made to cover his tracks. After his arrest, John Leatham initially denied everything. He claimed he didn't know Paige and insisted she had never entered his store, but police already had hard evidence: security footage, blood samples from the floor and his car, and the unmistakable image of a body in a trash bag. Faced with this overwhelming proof, John Leatham changed his story and confessed to the crime. He claimed it all happened in a panic. According to him, Paige entered the store, placed an order, and asked if he was hiring. He asked her age, and when she said 15, he declined. He then alleged that Paige threatened to accuse him of inappropriate behavior if he didn't give her the job. He claimed he panicked, fearing he'd be falsely accused, haunted by his brother's criminal history, and grabbed a knife. John described the moment as a sudden conflict. He claimed Paige started yelling, and he struck her in an attempt to make her stop. When he realized she was no longer alive, he wrapped her body, hid it in a storage area, and went home. There, he hid the body in a shed, changed clothes, and the next day took his family on a weekend trip to Vallow as if nothing had happened. 2 days later, he returned and left the body in a brush-covered area by the roadside. Investigators scrutinized his version of events carefully. First, there was no support for the claim of blackmail. Paige had no history of aggression or manipulative behavior. Her mother, friends, and co-workers all described her as kind, gentle, and respectful. She already had a job at a salon she loved. There was no reason for her to be seeking work elsewhere. Forensics also revealed the attack was not a quick outburst. It involved a prolonged struggle and numerous injuries, ruling out the idea of a momentary lapse. There was no evidence of intimate violence or any personal connection between Paige and John. This made his motive even harder to understand. He maintained that he had no intent to harm and acted in response to what he saw as a threat. But the nature of the attack, 146 sharp force injuries, many targeting the neck and face, left no doubt about the level of brutality. Details of the case began to appear in the media. The public reacted with disbelief to John's explanation. One aspect that drew particular outrage was what he did after the crime, taking his family on a trip, supposedly to clear his mind. In light of the evidence, John Leatham was formally charged with the crime. His confession, paired with far-fetched justifications, failed to earn sympathy from either investigators or the public. From the very beginning, it was clear this was not a momentary lapse, but a deliberate attempt to cover up a serious offense, and although authorities never identified a precise motive behind the act, the scale and brutality of the attack spoke volumes. As soon as John's name became known to the public, attention quickly turned not just to him, but to those around him. In particular, people began focusing on his twin brother, George. George's criminal history became widely known only after the case surrounding Paige's death was revealed. Psychological evaluations showed the brothers had different levels of self-control, but both tended to avoid taking responsibility and to misrepresent facts. John had always seemed like a respectable person, while George had frequently been in trouble with the police. Journalists, bloggers, and Clydebank residents became increasingly interested in the Leatham family. People started investigating the brothers' backgrounds, comparing them and guessing what caused their aggressive behavior. Some people believed the family had a history of suppressed anger, even if it wasn't obvious. On September 5, 2016, John Leatham's trial began at the High Court in Glasgow. The trial was a major public event. Paige's family, along with reporters, activists, and concerned Clydebank residents, filled the courtroom, all seeking answers. Pamela, Paige's mother, testified first. She explained that their lives had been changed forever since Paige went missing. She spoke of sleepless nights, haunted by the fear of imagining she heard Paige's voice, and of the constant emptiness and pain. Most heartbreakingly, she described how difficult it was to watch her other children struggle to understand that their sister would never be coming home. Andrew, Paige's stepfather, also spoke to the court, explaining how devastated he was by the tragedy. He said it had made it impossible for him to manage everyday life. He became especially emotional when talking about their son, Andy, who has developmental disabilities. Andy didn't understand why Paige, the sister he used to spend time with, was gone. Andrew said Andy repeatedly asked when Paige was coming home, and the family had to avoid giving him a straight answer. His statement deeply affected everyone in the courtroom. Investigators presented strong evidence, security videos, forensic analysis, witness statements, and John's own admission. His lawyers admitted he killed Paige, but claimed it was a panicked, unplanned act. On October 12, 2016, 7 months after Paige Doherty's murder, John Leatham was sentenced, with Judge Lady Ray setting a minimum prison term of 27 years before he would be eligible for parole. For Paige's family, this was seen as a step toward justice. As her mother stated, it wouldn't bring Paige back, but it ensured that her killer wouldn't be free anytime soon. The court emphasized the brutality of the crime and John's efforts to conceal it, dismissing any suggestion of an emotional breakdown or moment of panic. Despite the overwhelming evidence and public reaction, John's defense team filed an appeal, arguing that the sentence was too harsh. Their claim rested on the facts that John had no prior criminal record, had a family, including a young daughter. They insisted the crime was not premeditated and that John had shown remorse. Therefore, they argued, he deserved a reduced sentence. This sparked outrage across Clydebank, especially among Paige's family and friends. Nevertheless, the appeals court reviewed the case and reduced the minimum term from 27 to 23 years. The judge cited a lack of evidence for pre-planning and the fact that he had confessed. This decision triggered a strong backlash from the public. For many, it felt like rewarding a criminal. Paige's relatives publicly stated that they considered the reduction an insult, not just to them, but to Paige's memory. John's actions after the crime, cleaning up, hiding the body, and pretending everything was normal at work, showed a lack of remorse. During the hearings, John remained calm and avoided any interaction with Paige's family. His cold, emotionless demeanor implied he He didn't connect with the gravity of his actions. His failure to apologize or express sympathy to Paige's family or her loved ones reinforced the argument against reducing his sentence. The final ruling left a bitter taste. On one hand, the offender was behind bars. On the other, knowing that he could be released in just over 2 decades sparked discomfort for many. But the most important outcome was that the crime received a formal legal judgment, and Paige's family had the opportunity to speak publicly and share the pain they had endured. The court answered the question of who, but the question of why remained unanswered. The Leatham family faced public condemnation. So, authorities arranged protection for John's wife after she became a target of verbal and physical attacks during prison visits. She was harassed and assaulted until she eventually fled to Poland with her daughter. John's brother, George, continued to engage in criminal behavior, threatening people with weapons and physically assaulting his wife. The family's darker history began to surface after the violent loss of her daughter Paige. Pamela started a foundation to help families experiencing similar tragedies. Later, Pamela had another daughter. Although the family never fully recovered from their grief, they tried to move on. The town of Clydebank remembers Paige through memorial walks where participants wear pink and release balloons. Her funeral was well attended, and her casket was carried in a horse-drawn carriage. On what would have been her birthday, friends organized a party in her memory, a celebration she never had the chance to enjoy. Paige is remembered not only as a victim, but as a symbol of remembrance and a stark reminder of the impact of senseless violence. On July 15, 2015, a group of travelers stopped near the town of Winaka, South Australia. They were on their way to Adelaide and pulled over at a roadside rest area. While some wanted to use the restroom or simply stretch their legs, they noticed an old, tattered suitcase some distance from the designated parking spots. It appeared to have been there for quite some time. Though hesitant to pry, the sight of children's clothes peeking through a tear in the bag ultimately overwhelmed their hesitation. One of the travelers nudged the suitcase with their foot. Then, an even more peculiar sight emerged from beneath the fabric, a white object resembling a bone. The group debated whether the suitcase had simply fallen off a passing vehicle containing discarded items. They decided not to investigate further and continued their journey to Adelaide. However, the nagging feeling that they might have stumbled upon human remains stayed with them. Later, one of the women in the group contacted the police and reported their discovery. When police arrived at the rest area, they easily located the suitcase and inside, the skeleton of a small child. Disturbingly, there was tape on the skull, presumably covering the mouth, and a diaper placed over it. This suggested a possible attempt to suffocate or strangle the child before death. From the outset, law enforcement was cautious about releasing information to the public, wanting to avoid causing panic and being misled by false leads, at least until they could identify the body. The suitcase contained, in addition to the complete skeleton, several items seemingly belonging to a young child. Dresses, t-shirts, and other children's clothing. Notably, there was also a pair of men's boxer shorts and a small, hand-sewn patchwork quilt. Often a gift from a loved one, light-colored hair was also found, which provided some initial clues for the investigation. Investigators first checked all regional missing children reports, but found no matches. Every item in the suitcase was carefully examined, yet yielded no identifying information, not even a name. It was also unclear how long the suitcase had been at the rest area. Forensic experts established a temporary base at the site, meticulously examining the surrounding area where the remains were found. Meanwhile, a forensic pathologist confirmed that the remains were those of a girl, likely between 2 and 4 years old. According to the expert, the remains could have been there for several years. The lack of any missing person report for the child over so many years was perplexing. The police interviewed road crews and local residents who frequented the area, hoping someone might have noticed the suitcase before. They theorized that it might have been moved to the rest area after being in another location for an extended period. Some local residents reported noticing a strange suitcase with children's clothes sticking out, but none had looked closely to see what was inside. A thorough forensic analysis of the isolated location confirmed that the suitcase had been there for a considerable amount of time, simply overlooked. One theory was that it had been lying to the side and had been dragged around by wild animals. Still, no information was found about the child's identity. To solve the mystery, South Australian detectives launched one of the largest investigations in the state's history. The town near the suitcase's discovery was a small farming community. The police gathered all available evidence, the girl's belongings and information about her hair color, and went door to door, showing the items to every local resident, hoping someone would recognize them. When no one could provide any information, they concluded that the child likely hadn't lived in the immediate area before her death. The search area was then expanded, and detectives began focusing on neighboring towns, paying particular attention to kindergartens and medical facilities. A large list of missing children was compiled, but a thorough check revealed no matches. After that, they tried to catalog the items found in the suitcase and checked if they bore any unique brands, hoping to trace the purchase, but this yielded no results. The girl wore completely ordinary clothing. After all, the only clue left was the handmade blanket. It looked like the kind of item a loving grandmother often gifts to her granddaughter. Finally, they decided to appeal to the public through the media, showing photos of the blanket, the other items, and the suitcase itself. Following the media appeal, tips started coming in from the public. One local resident recalled noticing a well-dressed man walking along the side of the road with a suitcase in his hands. However, the witness had difficulty describing the stranger or providing an approximate date. Checking other leads also yielded no results. Weeks turned into months of fruitless searching. By this point, journalists had dubbed the nameless girl the suitcase baby. The situation shifted in early October 2015 when the police station received another tip. Report number 1267. The number reflected the seemingly hopeless nature of the case. Few believed that another random call could radically change the course of the investigation. The caller was a woman identified herself as a long-time family friend of Carly Pierce Stevenson. According to her, Carly had grown up in Northern Australia, a 20-year-old single mother from Alice Springs. She said she had once been very close to Carly and her daughter, Candalyce Pierce. Both had disappeared many years earlier under suspicious circumstances in 2009. The prevailing belief was that Carly had simply abandoned her family and left with the child. When the friend saw the blanket and clothes on the news, she immediately recognized them. After the report, investigators spoke to Carly's stepfather. He also recognized all of the items. Her mother, Colleen, was abandoned by her father while pregnant. Carly lived with Colleen her whole life, and Colleen later remarried. Carly had a close relationship with her mother and stepfather, but never knew her biological father. She was known as good-natured, bright, and independent. Carly began working almost immediately after Candalyce was born, and Colleen helped her with childcare. About a year before her disappearance, Carly met a young man. They began dating and then moved in together. Almost immediately, those close to her noticed that Carly became somewhat distant and communicated with her loved ones less frequently. Just a month before she disappeared, she announced that she wanted to break up with this boyfriend. Then, she suddenly announced that she was planning a trip around Australia to show her daughter the country. Although this decision seemed somewhat impulsive, it was consistent with Carly's free-spirited nature, so no one suspected anything amiss. Shortly before leaving, she told her family that she wasn't going to travel alone, but with a man named Daniel James Holdham. Colleen received limited information about Daniel. She knew that this man was 10 or even 15 years older than her daughter and that they had been friends for some time. When Colleen met Daniel, she immediately noticed his strange behavior. Daniel avoided direct eye contact, kept his eyes downcast, and barely communicated, limiting himself to a few words in conversation. He was aloof, even a little unsettling. Colleen tried to dissuade her daughter from traveling with him, but Carly was adamant. After that, Colleen insisted that Carly at least leave Candalyce with her during this trip, but this request was denied. In November 2008, Carly and Candalyce moved away from Alice Springs. Initially, Carly contacted her family daily, but the calls gradually decreased. Eventually, she only sent occasional messages. By Christmas that year, Colleen had not heard from Carly in a long time. Colleen was especially worried because Carly always contacted her for Christmas, her favorite holiday. Colleen, fearing something terrible had happened to Carly and Candalyce, the following day, Carly texted Colleen again, but appeared focused solely on getting money. It was odd that Carly never called, only texted, but her family didn't find this suspicious. When detectives heard the story, they initially focused on confirming the girl's identity, setting aside Carly for the time being. Carly's friend assisted them in this process. A few days later, she came to the station and presented several photographs showing Candalyce wearing the same clothes found in the suitcase. One photo depicted the girl sitting in a stroller with a similar handmade patchwork blanket draped over her lap. Candalyce's grandmother had sewn the blanket based on DNA extracted from the girl's toothbrush. A DNA profile was created, and it matched the material found in the suitcase. Police finally confirmed that they had found the body of 2-year-old Candalyce. Closer examination revealed that Colleen's mother had briefly filed a police report in 2009, but she later withdrew it. Despite the disappearance of Carly and Candalyce, some of their digital activity continued for years afterward. This included not only text messages, but also financial transactions. Money continued to be withdrawn from the card. The activity only stopped after Colleen's death. Detectives are now focused on finding the child's mother, Carly. It was unclear if Carly had met the same fate as her daughter. On August 29, 2010, almost 5 years before the suitcase containing the body was found, a group of cyclists were exploring a remote area of the Vallow State Forest, a very isolated area in New South Wales. The area is infamous for being the dumping ground of serial killer Ivan Milat, who left the bodies of his victims there in the 1982nd and 1992nd. The group inadvertently got lost in a dense part of the forest. There, a bone caught their attention. Assuming it belonged to an animal, given its location deep in the forest, they initially dismissed it. However, Valanglo's notoriety made them consider that it might be human. The group initially drove away, convincing themselves it was a dead kangaroo. But after a few hours, having explored other areas, they returned to the site. This time, they found a human skull a few meters from the first bone. The cyclists immediately contacted law enforcement. Given Valanglo's history and the frequent false reports of bone discoveries, the detectives asked for a photograph. The group had to return to the site again to take a picture of the skull. After receiving the photo, the police confirmed that it was not a prank, but a genuine human skull. Law enforcement officers were dispatched to the site. After a thorough examination of the area, most of the bones were recovered. Investigators concluded that they belonged to a woman who had died under violent circumstances. She had sustained multiple injuries, including a fractured sternum and spine, consistent with a severe attack. The rib cage had been crushed, likely by a heavy object or stomping. The remains were scattered over a wide area, indicating that they had been there for a long time. Police searched for clues to identify the victim, initially suspecting she might have been one of Ivan Milat's victims. They found a T-shirt a silver earring, and a white sock. The only thing they established was that the T-shirt was manufactured in Australia between 2003 and 2006. This ruled out the serial killer because he had already been arrested back in 1996. After almost a year of fruitless searching, the New South Wales Police decided to consult a renowned anthropologist and archaeologist. Up until that point, she had rarely been approached by law enforcement, but this time she seemed to be the only way to identify the deceased. The woman was tasked with reconstructing the victim's appearance based on the skull. The resulting portrait was distributed throughout the country, hoping someone would recognize the deceased. Even with the reconstruction, no information surfaced. By this point, only the approximate time of death has been determined. In 2009, a controlled burn was conducted in the forest area. Traces of burning on the bones suggested that the remains were already present before the fire. This narrowed the time frame of the woman's disappearance to between 2003 and 2009. Despite this, the victim remained unidentified for the next 5 years. The media dubbed the girl the Angel of Vallow because the word angel was written on her T-shirt. However, forensic scientists managed to extract a complete DNA profile of the victim from the body and the evidence found. For 5 years, they regularly compared it with national and even international missing persons databases. After confirming the identity of Candalyce's remains, the investigators are still actively searching for information about Carly. The case involved 2 deceased individuals found almost 1,000 kilometers apart. However, DNA profiles showed a match. The investigators are still actively searching for information from Carly's friend, who said that a week after the trip began, Carly had called her very upset. Carly said she had made a big mistake by going on the trip and wanted to return home. Unfortunately, Carly provided no details and then suddenly stopped communicating, with only text messages continuing. For a while, Carly's mother received photos of her daughter and granddaughter, who appeared happy and healthy. However, by September 2009, all such messages ceased. Colleen worried that her daughter was trying to distance herself during this period. A missing persons report was filed, but because communication with Carly continued via text, Colleen withdrew the report, believing she was okay. Detectives now believe that Carly and Candalyce were likely already dead at this point. During this trip, Carly was stopped for a traffic violation on November 8, 2008, on the highway near Coobapedy, and again in early December 2008 in the suburb of Canberra. It is believed that Carly was murdered on December 15, 2008, and then the girl was killed within a month. However, between 2009 and 2012, someone continued to use Carly's phone, bank cards, and even benefits in her name. It was obvious that someone was trying to exploit the deceased's identity for personal gain. Police found that from the end of 2008 to 2012, more than $90,000 had been withdrawn from Carly's bank account. Throughout that time, her mother, Colleen, continued to send her money, about $500 at a time, in the hope that she was traveling and needed the money and would soon return home. The longer detectives tracked Carly's activities after leaving town, the more frequently the name Daniel James Hold'em surfaced. As it turned out, he had a long history of violence against women, even complaints of child harassment. Prior to meeting Carly, Daniel was well known to law enforcement. They were unable to locate Daniel quickly, but they found his cousin. The man said that Carly, Candalyce, and Daniel had visited him for a few days. He recalled that Carly and Daniel seemed to be dating, but they had a conflict, apparently over money. Daniel believed that Carly should pay for some of his expenses, and she objected strongly. After the conflict, in the middle of the night, he said that they went for a drive to cool off. He was gone for a few hours, and when he returned, Carly was no longer with him. According to Daniel, During the drive, Carly had simply asked to be dropped off at a hotel, said she was leaving and returning her home. Daniel said he was then going to take Candace to her mother before continuing the journey alone. The strange thing is, Daniel's cousin lived near Vallow State Forest. Carly and Candace disappeared after meeting with him. This made Daniel the main suspect. Investigators checked Daniel's phone records. Even though Daniel said he dropped Carly off at the hotel, her phone was still active and near Daniel's location. The investigation then tried to prove Daniel took money from Carly's bank account. Suddenly, a woman appeared. It turned out that she had been impersonating Carly in real life. She had communicated with bank employees and social service workers when they requested benefits. Detectives then focused on finding the woman who had pretended to be Carly. She was later identified as Hazel Passmore. It emerged that Hazel had been dating Daniel before Carly's trip. They had met several years before Carly and her daughter disappeared, and he had offered Hazel a trip to Australia. She accepted, bringing her 3 children with her. 2 of them were from a previous relationship, but Daniel claimed that the third was his. The trip initially went well. Eventually, they decided to settle in Alice Springs, where Hazel hoped to find stable employment. After some time, they met Carly. Daniel was deeply involved in criminal activity, selling illegal substances, and making frequent 15-hour trips to Adelaide several times a month. He would collect large quantities of illegal substances, bring them back, and sell them. During one of these trips in 2008, he took Hazel and her 3 children during a night drive to avoid a kangaroo. Daniel swerved and the car flipped. Hazel's 2 older children were thrown from the car and killed. Hazel lost a leg and became partially paralyzed. While Hazel was recovering in the hospital, Daniel visited her with Carly and Candace. Just one day later, in mid-December 2008, Daniel left on a trip with Carly, his new girlfriend, leaving the traumatized and heartbroken Hazel behind. Hazel sued him for damages for the accident that left her in a wheelchair. This all happened in December. When she told Daniel about the lawsuit, he suddenly said that he had made a big mistake and would return to her for Christmas. He did arrive with gifts just a few days after the murder. When detectives contacted Hazel and informed her of Carly and Candace's deaths, she denied any knowledge of their fate. She also claimed that she had not been dating Daniel for about 3 years. However, when pressed, she admitted that she had helped her ex-boyfriend gain access to Carly's accounts. She had also sent messages to the victims' relatives, posing as Carly. Hazel insisted she didn't know what had happened to them. Thinking Daniel had simply stolen her cards, the situation changed when she was threatened with jail time for fraud. Hazel then revealed that she had accidentally seen an image of a dead woman on the forest floor on Daniel's phone. During a confrontation, Daniel confessed to killing both Carly and Candace. During a committal hearing in August 2017, Daniel allegedly told a witness that he had stomped on Carly Pierce Stevenson's throat, crushed her windpipe, and buried her body in the Vallow forest, then crushed Candace's windpipe with his foot and stepped on her chest, breaking her ribs. He did not kill Candace immediately, but drove with her for several days between cities, pretending to be her father. Then, in a motel, he wrapped Candace's face with tape and put a diaper over Candace's head to suffocate her. When Candace died, he hid. Her body was stuffed into a suitcase and dumped in Wanaka, where it remained for nearly 7 years. Meanwhile, instead of going to the police, Hazel became an active participant, continuing to impersonate Carly to collect benefits. Hazel, her only surviving child, and Daniel continued to travel, staying in various motels. The entire group lived off the allowances and funds transferred by Carly's mother. Hazel now claimed that she only participated out of fear that Daniel would harm her. This seemed implausible, since they hadn't even seen each other for the past 3 years. During that time, She could easily have gone to the police. When the local community learned the details of the case, they demanded that Hazel be held accountable as an accomplice. However, she provided all of this information to the police in exchange for leniency. Most significantly, she revealed that she had stolen a flash drive containing images of the deceased Carly from Daniel's phone and given it to her sister for safekeeping. Investigators were able to retrieve the flash drive and verify its contents, which proved to be damning evidence against Daniel. He was arrested in October 2015 for the double murder and a long list of other crimes. In June 2018, Daniel Holdom pleaded guilty, avoiding a jury trial. Bruce Pierce, Stevenson's father and grandfather, made a written statement during the sentencing hearing, expressing his desire for the death penalty for Daniel Holdom. However, New South Wales abolished the death penalty for murder in 1955. Prosecutor Mark Tedeschi described the murders as horrific murders, saying that both murders are of the worst kind and can rightly be described as heinous, abhorrent, hateful, gravely reprehensible, and extremely wicked. On 30 November 2018, Holdom was sentenced by the NSW Supreme Court to 2 consecutive life terms without parole for murder. The criminal's motive remains a mystery. The prosecutor believed the murders were thrill-seeking and motivated by several factors, including gaining access to baby Candalyce, toward whom he had previously shown abuse interest, and financial gain in the form of benefits and transfers from her mother. Due to the poor condition of the girl's remains, the abuse theory could not be confirmed. Investigators believed that Daniel may have committed many more crimes, but the investigation in this direction yielded no results. Daniel revealed some details of his abusive childhood, which might shed light on his history of violence against women. According to Daniel, he had a terrible childhood with a relative who regularly beat him, deprived him of food, forced him to drink vodka, locked him up, and even poured boiling water on him. He tried to escape several times, but the police returned the teenager. Against this backdrop, he began taking illegal banned substance from the age of 11. Later, he attempted to end one's own life 3 times. Despite the triumph of justice, this was a deeply tragic case. Carly and Candalyce's mother and grandmother did not live to see this moment. Both died before the remains were found and identified. After all these events, the handmade blanket found in the bag with the baby's bones was given to the Pierce family. Carly and her daughter, Candalyce, were buried in the town of Alice Springs, Australia. Krista Chen is a woman who has built her life around helping others. Born on September 15, 1985, she has always wanted to make a positive difference in the world. Her journey began in an unexpected place, the kitchen. A talented pastry chef, she owns Sweet as Pie in Denver's Bonnie Brae neighborhood, where she delights customers with her beautiful desserts. But her aspirations didn't stop there. Krista decided to go back to school to pursue a career that would make a profound impact on the lives of her community. Her tireless efforts paid off. In 2021, she was honored to receive the prestigious Walters Clower Award for her outstanding achievements in the field of clinical communication, thanks to her research on the impact of social factors on health in low-income communities. Krista wanted to go beyond prescribing medications to understanding why some communities have difficulty accessing healthcare and finding ways to support them. After graduating, she worked as a pharmacist at Kroger in Memphis. Her colleagues remember her as a warm, caring person who was always willing to help patients understand their medications. Outside of work, she raises dogs and runs marathons to raise money for St. Jude Children's Hospital. At the age of 36, she has achieved much success, has a stable career, and is ready to start married life. Krista is not married and has always dreamed of finding the ideal partner. Bradley Robert Dawson appeared in November 2021. Seemingly the one she had been looking for. He worked in information technology, was financially stable, charming, and considerate. He won Christie over with his attentiveness. However, the truth behind it was not like a fairy tale. When he met Christ, Bradley had not yet officially divorced his ex-wife. Although he filed for divorce in September 2021, he had a troubled past, controlling and manipulating his ex-girlfriend, Kristen Baker. A former college lover of Bradley, later revealed many worrying things about him. Kristen shared that Bradley had been obsessed with Fiji and constantly talked about wanting to go there. She also expressed her concern about his erratic behavior, particularly when he drank, explaining that he would completely change and do things he did not remember the next day. She added that he had been very manipulative and passionate about making money to fund travel and live a lavish lifestyle. These were warning signs that Christie had failed to recognize because Bradley had skillfully concealed his darker side and gained her trust. Christie and Bradley's relationship progresses surprisingly quickly. Bradley's divorce from his ex-wife was finalized on January 11, 2022, and just 37 days later, on February 18, 2022, he married Christie at the historic James Lee House in Memphis. It took just 3 months from meeting to getting married. Christie's friends were shocked by the haste. A few months after their wedding, in July 2022, Christie and Bradley embarked on their dream honeymoon to a lavish destination, Turtle Island Resort, located in Fiji's Yasawa Islands, is a 500-acre private paradise that only accommodates a maximum of 14 couples at a time. It was Christie's dream trip, with crystal-clear waters, pristine white sands, and complete privacy in one of the most beautiful locations in the world. On July 7, 2022, Christie and Bradley checked into Bureau 15, a waterfront villa just a short walk from the ocean. Their first day seemed perfect. They took part in resort activities, admired the natural beauty around them, and appeared to be a happy, newlywed couple. However, Christie was unaware that Bradley had visited this same resort about 2 years earlier with his ex-wife during their honeymoon. This shocking discovery would spark the argument that ultimately led to Christie's death on the 8th of July, 2022. What started as a beautiful day in Fiji for Christ and Bradley took a dark and tragic turn. They spent their day enjoying the resort's amenities and joined the evening's signature floating bar beach party, where guests gathered on platforms above the clear, blue waters to share drinks and enjoy the sunset over the Pacific. The evening should have been magical and romantic, filled with laughter among honeymooners, sharing stories about their new lives together. At first, it seemed Christie and Bradley were no different from the other couples. However, as the night progresses, tensions between Christie and Bradley begin to emerge. Christie uncovered something devastating. The same resort she believed had been chosen as their special honeymoon destination was, in fact, the exact location where Bradley had spent his honeymoon with his ex-wife. What she had thought was a romantic and thoughtful gesture turned out to be a recycled experience. The revelation left her feeling betrayed and deeply hurt. Resort staff later recalled Christie's noticeable shift in mood. She was no longer the joyous bride who had arrived just a day earlier. Dinner that evening at the resort's exclusive restaurant became tense, breaking the intimate atmosphere and drawing the attention of other diners. Christie and Bradley were arguing in hushed, yet intense tones, with observers noticing Christie's efforts to hide her tears. The romantic, happy atmosphere that initially colored their trip was now replaced by coldness and disappointment. By midnight, the argument had escalated. Christie felt stuck, humiliated, and betrayed, as if she were trapped on an island with a man who had now become a stranger. Witnesses observed Christie and Bradley leaving the party around that time, heading back to their waterfront villa. To outsiders, they appeared to be a normal couple, enjoying a fun evening. But the obvious tension between the two told a different story. What would happen next in their villa would shatter the peaceful illusion of paradise forever. At approximately 12:40 a.m. on the 9th of July, Mark Andrew Breesky, an Australian businessman staying nearby, was awakened by disturbing noises coming from Christie and Bradley's villa. He heard loud banging and screams, followed by unsettling silence. The sounds were violent and desperate, as if someone was fighting for their life. Several other guests in nearby rooms also reported hearing terrifying noises, including a constant, insistent banging and a high-pitched sound. Eventually, everything fell into an eerie, cold, deathly silence. In those fateful moments, the fairy tale of Chris and Bradley's honeymoon turned into an unimaginable horror. Inside their villa, Christie was fighting for her life. A once passionate honeymoon argument spiraled into brutal violence. The very place meant to be a symbol of love and celebration became the scene of Christie's tragic murder. Guests nearby could never have imagined the nightmare unfolding just steps away from their luxury accommodation. The attack was brutal and relentless. Bradley attacked Chris with his fists, slammed her head against the toilet, and used the toilet cistern lid as a weapon. For 6 agonizing minutes, Christie endured unimaginable pain and terror. She fought back, as evidenced by her injuries, but she was no match for his uncontrollable rage. Around 2:00 a.m., as Chris lay dying in their bathroom, resort security guards spotted Bradley alone on the beach. The man who had arrived at the resort with his wife was now preparing to flee the scene of a horrific crime. The tropical paradise where they had come to celebrate their honeymoon would now be remembered as the site of one of Fiji's most shocking murders. Bradley's actions after the murder revealed his calculated and cold-hearted nature. While Christie's lifeless body lay in the bathroom, he meticulously assembled his escape plan. Moving purposefully through the villa, he stepped over her body to gather essentials. He took his passport, crucial for leaving the country, and collected over $1,000 in cash intended for their honeymoon. Most disturbingly, he also took Christie's credit cards to fund his escape, shamelessly exploiting her even in death, displaying a cold and cunning determination. Bradley ensured he left behind anything that could potentially track his movements. He abandoned his GPS watch, which had recorded his fitness activities, and left his smartphone behind to avoid location tracking. These were not the actions of someone panicking. They were deliberate steps taken by a man intent on vanishing. As other resort guests slept, oblivious to the tragedy that had unfolded, Bradley made his way to the beach. Turtle Island Resort's secluded location, typically a hallmark of its exclusivity, now worked to his advantage. With no nearby police stations or immediate assistance available, he seized the opportunity to act. Under the cover of night, he dragged one of the resort's kayaks into the water. The same ocean that had represented tranquility and escape to honeymooners now became his desperate route to freedom. The nighttime kayak journey to Matakawalavu Island was fraught with danger, especially for someone with little experience. Even in a relatively calm stretch of the Pacific Ocean, the dark and treacherous waters presented significant risks, but desperation pushed Bradley forward. With every stroke of the paddle, he increased the distance between himself and the crime scene. Clinging to the hope of evading capture, for 36 hours, he remained a fugitive. During that time, Christie's body lay undiscovered in the villa, and Bradley likely believed he had successfully escaped justice. The isolation of Turtle Island Resort, once its key selling point, became a major obstacle in the investigation. The lack of immediate access to authorities or rapid response teams delayed efforts to pursue Bradley. During his brief time on the run, he probably thought he had committed the perfect crime. In a remote location, thousands of miles from home, he likely believed he could disappear without a trace. The man who once vowed to love and protect Chris for the rest of his life fulfilled that promise in the most ruthless way imaginable. He thought he could evade the consequences, but dark secrets will eventually be exposed. In the end, It was his complacency and excessive overconfidence that led to his downfall. On the morning of the 9th of July, the day at Turtle Island Resort began as radiant and peaceful as ever. Guests went about their routines, entirely unaware of the tragedy that had taken place just a short distance from their accommodations. When Chris and Bradley didn't show up for breakfast, the resort staff were not initially alarmed. Honeymooners often took advantage of peaceful mornings to sleep in or enjoy private time together. The Do Not Disturb sign hanging on the door of Bureau 15 seemed to reinforce this assumption, and no one suspected anything out of the ordinary. But as the morning wore on and Chris and Bradley still hadn't shown up, people began to worry. At an all-inclusive resort where guests often had scheduled activities, their absence for so long couldn't go unnoticed. By lunchtime, when they still hadn't shown up, things became increasingly suspicious. The resort manager faced a difficult decision. The Do Not Disturb sign was still on the door, and disturbing the honeymooners was something Turtle Island Resort always avoided. As guests' privacy was a top priority, however, something felt off. The manager consulted the staff. Had anyone seen Chris and Bradley's security guards recalled seeing them leave the beach party the previous night. But no one had seen them since. They had missed the morning snorkeling trip, the afternoon nature walk, and even lunch, a highly unusual absence for a resort renowned for personalized service and guest activities. On the 9th of July, 2022, at 3:00 p.m., the manager decided to act. He instructed housekeeper Thomas Maui to check on Christe and Bradley. Despite the Do Not Disturb sign, concerned for their well-being, the manager could not have anticipated what was about to be discovered. Thomas approached Bureau 15 hesitantly. Interrupting guests, especially honeymooners, was always uncomfortable. He knocked softly and asked if everything was okay, introducing himself as housekeeping. When no one answered, he knocked again, louder this time, and said he was checking on Chris and Bradley from housekeeping. Again, he was met with silence. Growing more anxious, Thomas circled the villa, looking for any sign of Chris and Bradley. The beachfront bureau's louvered windows allowed for partial visibility when the curtains weren't fully drawn. Near the bathroom window, something caught his eye. Peering inside, he saw something that would haunt him forever. Christe's lifeless body lay crumpled on the floor between the toilet and the wall. Blood stained the bathroom walls and floor in a grisly scene. A shattered toilet cistern lid nearby seemed to have been used as the weapon. Christe, who had arrived just 2 days earlier, had been brutally attacked and killed. Thomas staggered back, overcome with shock. Turtle Island, once known as a symbol of love and luxury, was now the scene of a crime beyond imagination. Trembling, he rushed to notify the resort manager. The Fiji police were contacted immediately, though their arrival would take time due to the island's remote location. The resort staff moved quickly to secure the crime scene, positioning guards to prevent anyone from accidentally encountering the horrific discovery in Bureau 15. But one critical question loomed: where was Bradley? His absence was deeply concerning. Was he injured, kidnapped, or more disturbingly, the perpetrator of the crime? A search began immediately. The island wasn't large. With only a limited number of possible hiding spots, staff combed every corner, shouting Bradley's name and checking all conceivable locations where he might have sought refuge. Still, there was no sign of him, until someone noticed a missing kayak from the beach. The realization hit hard. Bradley had fled. All evidence pointed to him as the primary suspect in Christe's murder. The Royal Fiji Police launched a manhunt. With limited resources and a vast ocean to search, the task was daunting. However, Bradley's arrogance proved to be his downfall. 36 hours after fleeing the resort, he was located on Matakawalevu Island by a local resident, Manoa Rail. When found, Bradley appeared disoriented and bore cuts and bruises on his hands and feet. He was intoxicated and repeatedly murmured that they had a fight. When villagers pressed him for answers, his response, chilling in its simplicity, was to tell them to call the police. Deep down, it seemed Bradley knew his escape attempt had failed. When Bradley was arrested on July 10, 2022, the case against him was already substantial. He was discovered on a remote island with his passport and belongings, far from the location where his wife, Krista, had been found dead. Witnesses reported hearing screams and the sounds of a violent altercation coming from their villa. Shortly after, Bradley fled in the middle of the night. Further intensifying suspicions of his guilt, his culpability seemed undeniable. However, at the Royal Fiji Police Headquarters in Suva, an unexpected turn of events unfolded before Bradley's lawyer arrived, and without carefully formulating a defense, he began to talk. What he said amounted to a graphic confession, exposing the chilling truth about what happened in Bureau 15. Leading the interview was Detective Sergeant Apasai Koroi. The interrogation was conducted in accordance with proper procedures for questioning a foreign murder suspect and was recorded, creating vital evidence for the courtroom. Surprisingly, Bradley appeared relieved to talk, likely succumbing to the weight of guilt, the isolation caused by his failed escape, and the realization that his freedom was lost. Speaking in a calm, detached tone, he remained chillingly indifferent to the gruesome details he described. Bradley told police that he and Krist went to bed, but when he turned to hug his wife, she reacted violently. He admitted to hurting her and said she expressed uncertainty about wanting to stay together. He shared that the argument escalated and continued in the bathroom, where Christie pushed him, causing him to lose his temper. She then fell next to the toilet, injured, had a cut on her face, and was bleeding. The confession shed light on Bradley's mindset. Even as he admitted to murdering Krista, he portrayed himself as the victim, claiming that she was the aggressor and that he merely lost it after being pushed. Detective Apasai probed for more details, and Bradley complied, describing the argument's escalation, his violent reaction, and the aftermath when he realized the gravity of his actions. His detailed account was incriminating and revealing. More damning still was Bradley's description of his actions following the murder. He admitted to packing his belongings, taking Christie's credit cards, and planning his escape. These were calculated, deliberate actions, not the chaotic or impulsive behavior of someone who committed a crime of passion. For hours, Bradley continued to voluntarily provide extensive details, seemingly compelled to justify his actions and present his version of events. Investigators carefully documented every word. The situation shifted dramatically. However, when Bradley's court-appointed lawyer, Iqbal Khan, arrived, Iqbal, a seasoned criminal defense attorney, immediately recognized Bradley's critical misstep. He had spoken to the police for hours without legal representation. It is a fundamental rule of defense to remain silent without a lawyer present. But Bradley had disregarded this principle. Iqbal promptly instructed him to cease speaking and requested a private consultation. What was discussed between Iqbal and Bradley remains confidential, but the impact was immediate. When the interrogation resumed, Bradley was no longer the open and confessional suspect he had been earlier. Instead, he became defensive and guarded. Fully aware of the gravity of his situation, presented with a written confession based on his prior statements, Bradley made a pivotal decision. He refused to sign it. This refusal created a significant legal hurdle for the prosecution. In Fiji's legal system, as in other Commonwealth countries, an unsigned confession complicates a case for prosecutors. Although the recorded interview could still serve as evidence, the defense could challenge the voluntariness and reliability of Bradley's statements. Lawyer Iqbal aggressively began constructing Bradley's defense, telling the media that his client denied all accusations, did not murder Christie, and that there was no evidence implicating him. This bold claim directly contradicted the recorded confession and other evidence, yet it clearly signaled that the defense intended to contest every aspect of the prosecution's case vigorously. Bradley's transformation was astonishing. Just hours after giving a detailed confession of his guilt, he claimed complete innocence. What initially seemed like a breakthrough in the investigation became a contentious piece of evidence debated for the next 2.5 years. Despite his refusal to sign the confession, the damage was done. The recording of his admission, made before he fully grasped its implications, provided prosecutors with a clear roadmap to his guilt. While his unsigned statement posed legal challenges, it could not negate his own words describing the murder of his wife. Krista. The autopsy conducted by Dr. Avakali Mate revealed the horrifying truth about Christie's final moments. She died from a traumatic brain injury caused by repeated blows to her head. Her injuries were severe and gruesome, extensive swelling around her eyes and mouth, deep cuts near her eyes, facial lacerations, bruises and cuts along her right arm, and a large wound on her back, surrounded by smaller incisions. The extent of her injuries prevented her body from being embalmed for transport to the U.S. Christie had to be cremated in Fiji, denying her parents the chance to give her a proper funeral and burial in their homeland. Bradley, despite his earlier confession, pleaded not guilty to the murder charges. During his time in prison, he repeatedly maintained his innocence in media interviews. He claimed that there was never any physical conflict in their relationship and that Christie was very important to him. His defense attorneys, initially Iqbal Khan and later Anil Prasad, argued that her death had been an accident, alleging that she had simply fallen while intoxicated. However, the evidence against Bradley was overwhelming. Witnesses described hearing sounds of violence. Forensic analysis of the crime scene confirmed a brutal attack. Most damning of all was the recorded confession in which he described how he killed Christie. For over 2 years, Bradley remained in a Fijian jail, denied bail. As the case slowly progressed through the legal system, in December 2024, Bradley stood trial at the Lautoka High Court. Over 8 days, the prosecution presented testimony from 14 witnesses, each adding to the growing evidence against him. Bradley neither testified in his defense nor called any witnesses, allowing the evidence to speak for itself. Witnesses recounted hearing sounds of violence from their villa. Forensic findings highlighted the brutality of the attack, and his attempt to flee with his passport and money further supported the argument for premeditation. In addition, his confession to the police about losing control and harming Christie remained critical to the case. Judge Riaz Hamza rejected the entire defense story that Christie's death was an accident. He pointed out Bradley's actions after the murder, such as fleeing the scene with his passport and cash, as evidence of deliberate intent. Justice Riaz stated that, for the aforementioned reasons, he was of the opinion that the defense's version of events could not be believed and must be rejected. On December 12, 2024, Bradley was found guilty of murder. In his judgment, Judge Riaz Hamza stated that, after reviewing all the evidence, he was satisfied that the prosecution had proven the murder charge against Bradley beyond reasonable doubt. Christie's parents were devastated by the tragic loss of their only child. During the sentencing on February 11, 2025, they gave heartfelt and heartbreaking statements about the impact of the incident. Christie's father testified in court that she was his only daughter, his only hope of survival, and that every day since her death has been a struggle to find meaning in his empty life. Christie's mother expressed her grief and anger, saying no mother should have to see her daughter die in such a way by a man who swore to love and cherish her. She hoped that the rest of Bradley's life would be filled with pain, loneliness, and despair, and hoped that the memories of what he did in his final moments would haunt him, for he truly was a monster. Justice Riaz Hamza sentenced Bradley Robert Dawson to life imprisonment, with a minimum of 18 years before parole eligibility. This means Bradley will not be eligible for parole until 2043, when he will be 63 years old. Tragically, Christe Chen will never see her 37th birthday, fulfill her dream of having children, or continue her life's work of providing health care to underserved communities